Welcome new and old friends. My name is 242, and today 42 got us some old stories. I thought a compilation would be pretty nice for today and get you some older stories I've done a while back. Also, there will be no Sunday word this week. So, turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. My house rules. 1. Always take off your shoes when you come in. They don't like dirt. 2. Always say hello. 3. When you enter the house, go straight to your room. 4. Lock your door. 5. If you leave your room, go straight to where you need to go. Do not stop walking. 6. Walk with your head up. 7. Never block your vision. 8. If you hear laughing, ignore it. It isn't there. 9. If you turn on a light, do not turn it back off. They will take care of it. 10. Do not turn off the music. One guest in particular doesn't like the quiet. 11. Do not look into the empty rooms. 12. When you go back to your room, lock the door again immediately. 13. Get your feet off of the floor as fast if possible. 14. If you hear someone calling your name, do not move. 15. If the sun is down, never look out your bedroom window. 16. Don't check the closet, under the bed, or the showers. They like privacy. 17. At 3 a.m., things will start to happen. Do not answer your door. You will hear tapping on your window. When you do, close your eyes. Do not open your eyes. 18. Make sure you go to sleep by 3:12 a.m. 19. Don't forget, you live alone. Please read this. This is your last chance. Hey, you. Yeah, you. This is my last hope of getting to you, so you better not ignore me. I've been here this entire time, but you constantly pretend I'm not here. That shadow you see out of the corner of your eye, that you brush off as your imagination, it's me. The tapping coming from your window in the dead of the night, that's me. The feeling of eyes against the back of your neck when you're trying to bathe, that's me. I know what you're thinking, and no, I'm not perverted. I'm just trying to keep you safe. There are so many things you are sheltered from, my child. You aren't safe, not unless I'm around. You know I exist. You can't lie to yourself and say I don't. I've been here with you forever. You see, nobody is safe. You're in the dark about something that could potentially ruin your life and everyone else around you. What do you imagine a monster looks like? A floating sheet? A walking corpse? Duck and pathetic. You'll know a real monster when you see it. It's in their eyes. Their eyes aren't human, and you can tell. But if you see their eyes, look away immediately, or you will be taken. When they smile, it's too wide, too fake. But by the time you see the smile, you're done for. Those are the only ways you can tell. Everything else looks human. Incredibly human. Cartoon monsters are bull. That's the simple truth. The boogeyman, zombies, vampires, and whatnots are insulting to the true beasts. The ones that want you to suffer endlessly. your screams echoing throughout the pits of Tartarus. The ones that will tear you apart slowly, mentally and physically, until you're nothing more than a pile of flesh and bones. But only if you're lucky. If they let you live, don't expect to last long, or for anyone you care about to. I've seen it too many times. The parents that are infected, making it out alive, but beating their children to death, then killing their spouses in horrible, gruesome ways. The affected always die last. Nobody has ever truly survived. These monsters, they cause all of it. The destruction of the families, the deaths of the innocent children, so much pain and suffering, just for their sick, demented pleasures. And they're coming for you next. I know that you sense something is off, and they're what's caused it. There is only one way you can protect yourself. The next time you hear me, whether I'm in your closet or outside your window, look at my eyes. I will solve all of your problems. Just look at me. I know I can save you. All you have to do is look at me. Look at my eyes. Look at my eyes.
Look at my eyes. Look at my eyes. Look at my eyes. I'm here.
Now be careful. That line of rock salt is the only thing keeping them out, the man said, welcoming my group into his refugees. Sea salt, I clarified. Sea salt keeps us out. Run. 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 If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, don't stop. It's been an hour since everyone on Earth, as far as I can tell, heard those same words. I was already walking through the park when I heard them, and after seeing what happens, I won't be stopping anytime soon. It's been 2 hours now. I've kept walking. I'm tired, but stopping is not an option. Some people try driving, but the act of getting in a car requires stopping, even for the briefest moment. And as those already driving when they heard the rules soon found out, it's impossible to move indefinitely in a vehicle, especially in a crowded city. Their screams kept me moving. It's been 4 hours now, and I'm exhausted, with the only thing pushing me forward being the fear of what awaits when I stop. And yes, I mean when. Proven by plenty of those around me, eventually I'll have to stop. Some have just given up, accepting their fates, only to immediately regret the decision. Some just couldn't take the screams anymore, and most simply don't see the point in continuing. And with every step, I'm starting to become more like the latter. It's been about 6 hours, and for the first time, I saw what happens up close. I was walking aimlessly down an alley, trying to get away from the madness, when I saw a young man no more than 16 crying. It didn't even register at first to me until he made eye contact with me. He had stopped moving. His eyes were bloodshot, and not just whites around his pupil. I mean the entirety of his eyes were crimson red. Black tears streamed down his expressionless face, and then he smiled. A wide, toothy smile that would have screamed of joy if it wasn't followed by an animalistic scream that would give the biggest horror fanatic nightmares. I wish I could say witnessing his dying moments was the most horrific thing to happen to me today. But then it hit me. The realization that I had stopped moving. Found on an iPhone search history. Hey Siri, show me funny videos. I'm bored and grounded. Hey Siri, show me funny videos. Hey Siri, show me funny TikToks. Hey Siri, show me videos of people falling and it's funny. Hey Siri, show me videos of people getting hurt. Hey Siri, where can I find someone to hurt my parents? Hey Siri, what's the best way to hurt someone? Hey Siri, where can I buy a hammer? Officer Miller sighed heavily. The dead bodies in front of him must have been Mr. and Mrs. Stevenson. Although with the decay, it could have been anyone. Neighbors had called police about a terrible stench coming from the apartment. He was no detective, but it looked like the young son who was still missing may be involved, and it broke his heart. He knew this family, and while Stevensons could be tough on their son, they loved him. The officer went for his radio to call it in when he felt a blow in the back of his head. His vision started to go dark as he heard, "Hey Siri, what's the best way to get rid of 3 bodies?" My family. I died 8 years ago. It wasn't particularly tragic or unusual, just a car accident. I don't blame the man who hit me. He was speeding because his wife was in labor, and there was black ice on the road. He lost control of the car, and I lost my life. It's not his fault. I know that. I'm not cruel, and I'm not vengeful. If anything, I'm the opposite. You see, I don't have any family left, and I had lost a few friends around that time. When it was time for my funeral, the only people who came was my boss and the family who killed me. The wife held her newborn daughter close to her chest. I hated my boss, and the cemetery was awfully lonely, so I followed the family home. Lily may as well have been my own flesh and blood. She was sweet and bright and oh so very small. She had trouble sleeping if someone wasn't rocking her crib, and her parents were so tired. After they put her to bed, it was easy for me to rock her crib for her. I didn't get tired. I could help her. As the years passed, Jack and Lori realized they weren't alone in the house. It didn't take long for them to make the connection between my funeral and when I had shown up. And I'd never been malevolent, so they weren't afraid or angry. They started to burn candles on the anniversary of my death day. They left an empty chair for meals and holidays. I really felt like a member of the family. Someone is trying to force the door. It's Lori's ex. He's obsessed. He's angry. He's going to hurt the family. My family. The thing about ghosts is the more offerings you get, the stronger you become. I've been enjoying candles, trinkets, and even the occasional food item for the past 5 years. I was strong from that. The knife feels warm in my hand, a shock of heat against the ice of my skin. Lori, Jack, and Lily are my family. I care about them, and they're not going to join me yet. If I put a lot of periods in the first sentence, The mods will have to remove it for being more than 2 sentences. I hope this works, because my captors say once I hit 100 upvotes, I'm done for. Last messages. I love you, Mom. I can hear footsteps on the stairs. I think he's outside my room. I hear sirens, but they're far away. I'm hiding in the closet. I hope he didn't hear me. Hang on, I heard something downstairs. The cops are already here looking for him. They'll catch him. Don't worry, Mom. I'm safe. I love you. The cops said he's some escaped serial killer and he's been breaking into houses around the area. Yes, Mom, it's on the news now. I'll keep my doors locked. Messages are displayed in chronological order, with the most recent at the top. Yes, Mom, it's on the news now. I'll keep my doors locked. The cops said he's some escaped serial killer and he's been breaking into houses around the area. Don't worry, Mom, I'm safe. I love you. The cops are already here looking for him. They'll catch him. Hang on, I heard something downstairs. I'm hiding in the closet. I hope he didn't hear me. I hear sirens, but they're far away. I can hear footsteps on the stairs. I think he's outside my room. I love you, Mom. I know when my husband is cheating on me. I know when my husband is cheating on me. It's funny. Something like 60% of marriages end in infidelity. But you never think it'll be yours. There are so many articles on it too. How to tell. What signs to watch for. Is he spending too much time in the office or just working hard? Crappy episodes on daytime TV. Some silly girl sobbing as it's all revealed. These articles, shows, dramas, they're all for weak women. I knew the moment my husband didn't love me anymore. Oh, it'll start small. He'll smile more for no reason. He'll laugh at little things she says or does. Things that he would never in a million years find funny if you said them. And they'll only get worse. His face will light up like a sun when he sees her. And he will see her. You can't stop it. She's everywhere in his life. Invasive like a cancer or a leech, sucking all of his attention and love away from you. And then, even worse, his friends, your friends, will notice. They'll tell you they've never seen him before like this. How happy he is. It's enough to make you sick. And finally, he'll tell you he's never felt love like this before, that he doesn't know how he lived without her. Well, something had to be done, obviously. I love my husband. I'm not having some little temptress steal him away from me. What kind of woman would I be then? No. So I took matters into my own hands. Thank God she's still little. I don't think I could have drowned her that easily if she could walk just yet. Peagle.com. Hello, thank you for using Peagle.com. Peagle.com is the best random chat website in the dark web. Please read the rules carefully before you proceed further. There are 11 rules you must keep in mind while using our service. 1. Be nice to everyone. 2. Don't give strangers your personal information. 3. Don't use the word ritual or rituals on your common interest box. You don't want to meet those people. 4. If something pops up and asks you to agree to some terms, simply click the small X hidden in the left corner. It's not from us or any human. 5. If you're chatting to someone and they ask if they can come over, say no and leave. If you said yes, then you invited over and we're not held responsible. 6. If someone tells you their name is Mr. McWell, report the user and move on. 7. If you meet someone in chat that asks you to solve a riddle, answer within 15 minutes. Hint: the answer is always a part of the human body. If you fail to answer it or give the wrong answer, then your best course of action is to destroy your device and any mirror in that room. Trust us, the alternative is worse. 8. We may be the best, but our video quality is imperfect. If audio comes after video, we're really sorry. Our bad. But if audio comes before the video, simply leave the website. There will be a knock at your door. Don't open it and wait 15 minutes after the knocking is gone to open that door. It is possible the knocking may come from inside your nearest bathroom. 9. If someone tells you you look hungry, say something that indicates you'll be back, like, I'll be back after a quick snack, or I'll be back after grabbing something to eat. Once you're out of the room, run. 10. If you notice a dark figure in the background of someone you're video chatting with, act as if everything is normal and leave after telling your new friend the code, "You look hungry." 11. If you try to hack us, we will gut you. Please take me instead, I screamed, grabbing at the 2 men who took my child. Sorry, ma'am. Children only, they said, as they continued loading up the last lifeboat on the ship. I woke up after having a dream where I was lying naked on the floor and unable to move after these 8 teenage boys violated my body until I died. I cried hard as I realized that after 20 years, this was the first time that I dreamt and felt all of it from our victim's point of view. The public library has an unused 3rd floor. The public library has a 3rd floor that the public is not allowed to go into. It is not used for staff, for storage, or for any technology at all. The elevator does not travel to that floor, and the stairs past that 3rd floor landing without acknowledgement. The building itself was seemingly built to include the 3rd floor, but no possible way to access it. It has never had a maintenance issue, no leak or broken window to attend to. The 3rd floor was an unusual feature in our small town, but live here long enough and you'll never think about it anymore. I was 9 when I saw her in the window. I was incredibly proud of myself for biking to the library all by myself. My mom had told me I could pick out 3 books and then come straight home, but I took my time there. I even stopped at the bakery on the way and had a chocolate croissant, slowly oozing chocolate, in my parka front pocket. I locked my bike by the front entrance and looked up. I don't know why I looked up. Maybe it was to take in the scenery that had come to demonstrate my adult independence to me. She was in the third window to the left, and she was completely immobile. She looked down at me as if she had asked me a question and was waiting on my reply. I didn't pay her much mind, as I thought maybe she was a patron or a library worker taking in the view. She watched as I made my way through the front doors and into the cool air conditioning within. Children's was located on the second floor. Normally, this is where my mother would steer me, but I figured that I was growing up now, and I made my way to the young adults on the next floor. I'd been here many times with my mom, and I knew that young adults was technically on the fourth floor. It was the first landing up from children's. When you're a kid, you don't really think much about things like that. It was just the way it was. So I made my way up to the next floor and approached a large wooden door to the right. It looked like every other door in the library, completely innocuous. I pushed it open and the smell of damp mustiness greeted me. The stacks inside were dark and it didn't seem as if anyone was there. "Can I help you?" a librarian asked from off to my side. Yes, I mustered up my most grown-up voice. "I am here for your young adult literature." She didn't say anything, but silently took me in. What must I have looked like to her? A dumb kid with a scraped knee who had put way too many syllables into the word literature? She considered me for a moment and finally nodded, pointing further down the stacks, and waved me off. I nodded gingerly and followed her pointed finger. I could only imagine what kind of books awaited me in the young adults. It wasn't entirely what I expected. I didn't understand a lot of the words, and I feared I made a mistake in venturing up to young adult. Clearly, I was not ready for young adult literature. If I couldn't even understand half of the words or the symbols. I know it wasn't in another language because it didn't look like French or Spanish. It looked like English, but when my brain looked at it, the letters just didn't seem to come together right. It was like there was a block in my brain, intentionally blacking it out or scrambling some of the letters so I couldn't quite get it there. She appeared suddenly behind me. "Can I help you find anything?" she asked. I don't know. I like animal stuff. Do you have anything like that?" I asked, wondering if maybe that was too babyish for young adults. She nodded and moved down the aisles next to me. I could see her face blurring between the books between us. She'd peruse the shelves and occasionally pull down a book or replace another one until finally she came back over to me. She handed them to me and I almost fell under the weight. These books were bigger than any I've read before. Luckily, she seemed to have picked some that I could easily understand the titles at least. Snake Tales and Other Warnings, The Jackal's Promise, and Loosen a Fox's Tongue were the titles she had chosen for me. To be honest, they didn't seem like my kind of books. She looked down at me, waiting for my reply. These seem good," I fumbled. "Please," she gestured to an armchair in the corner. "Take a seat," and sampled them. I did as she asked. Even now, all these years later, I still have trouble not listening when a librarian tells me to do something. I settled into the armchair, a small puff of dust raising off as I sat down. It smelled as musty as the rest, but she was watching me, and I didn't want to seem rude. So I picked up The Jackal's Promise and flipped it to the front page. There was no space for an author. There was only a black and white sketch of a black jackal on a hill under a full moon. It seemed to be holding something in its front paw, but I couldn't figure out what it was. The ink strokes all seemed to bleed into each other, and the image got more muddled the longer I tried to decipher it. The words made sense on their own, but I struggled with the sentences. I could catch basic descriptive words like yellow or insolent, but they didn't seem to make sense together. I glanced up to see the librarian still watching intently, and I began to try to read again. I felt more tired with every page I turned. My finger pads kept sticking to the pages. I licked them to try to turn the pages, but if anything, the pages became more like glue. I pulled an index finger up and had taken part of the page with me. The rip echoed throughout the stacks, and I looked up expecting to be admonished. But the librarian was no longer there. I placed my finger back down to assess the damage I've done to the book. Just a small rip. It seemed to be oozing something viscous and milky, though. It moved lazily across the page and towards my hand. I couldn't move my finger away, and I felt the cool dampness on the very tip of my finger. Then the cool liquid pushed itself under my fingernail. The pain was excruciating. I tried to stand, but when the book fell off my lap, it took my body down with it. It felt as if I was suddenly connected to a very heavy weight. I struggled with the book there on the dirty floor and looked around desperately to see if the librarian would come to rescue me. She was there where she had been when I'd first entered. She only watched me, looking more animated than I'd seen her yet. Her hands were curled tightly into a fist, and she seemed to only be barely restraining herself. I felt like the mouse struggling in a glue trap that the school janitor had placed out. I had watched it struggle that day, alone in the school hall closet. Its whines were high and pitiful, until finally it gnawed off the paw that had trapped it in the first place. I found it later curled up in a corner in a puddle of its own blood. Only now that I'm older do I see the parallels. I stopped struggling and stared at the ceiling above me. It seemed ironic that the first death I'd experience in my life would be my own. Then my phone rang. I turned to see that it had landed close by when I had fallen, tumbling out of my pocket along with my chocolate croissant. The phone flashed Mom. I didn't know how long I'd been gone for, but she must have been furious I hadn't been home yet. The librarian, who was now standing closer than ever, froze still. She had been moving to reach for me when the phone rang. Now she stared transfixed at the bright screen. It lit up her face with bright white light with every buzz. I could feel the book loosening its grip on me, and she retreated angrily away from the light. It slipped off with an unpleasant slick noise and lay harmless on the floor next to me. I picked up my phone and sprinted through the stacks, my phone still buzzing incessantly. If you've ever had a mom try to call you and get no answer, you know they don't stop calling. The screen illuminated the floor, flashing wildly until I reached the landing door. I slammed it shut behind me and sprinted down the landing before glancing down at my hand. The fingernail on my index finger was missing. There was no blood at all. It was just as if it had been wiped away entirely, never have existing in the first place. No one has noticed that missing fingernail ever since. I realized later that I still had one of the books in my backpack that the librarian had recommended to me, Loosen a Fox's Tongue. I went to return it to the library eventually after I gained the nerve back. I didn't want anything in my life that she could trace back to me, even unpaid library fines. I climbed my way to the third-floor landing, hoping to simply leave it outside of the door as an offering or maybe appeasement. However, there was no door on the third-floor landing to leave it at. When I asked a library worker about it, she said there never had been. My grief turned to shock when I learned my recently deceased wife's skull matched the DNA profile for a teen missing in 1987. The rest of her bones matched to 6 other people on that missing person list from the same time period. An email receipt sent to the wrong address. Hello, valued customer. Here at Northern Western Receivables, NWR, we would like to reach out and say thank you for making your recent purchase. As we pride ourselves on customer service, we are sending this customary email to make sure that the details of your orders are correct. If any changes need to be made, please reach out to our sales team so we can make things right. Age, 14. Gender, female. Alive or deceased, alive. Race, white/non-Hispanic. Final price, $25,000. Your package will be delivered on Saturday, October 31st. Please understand that due to the nature of our product, delivery will be made by an unmarked van between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. If you have received this email in error, please do not worry. A member of our customer service team will be contacting you shortly to help remedy the mistake. It was the last line of the email that truly scared me. I had opened it without thinking. Maybe my wife had been doing some online shopping? After a few moments and realizing what was being sold, I hastily exited out of my email, deleted the message to purge that had ever come to me. When they sent a picture of my wife with a gun to her head, I realized they already knew. I don't know what their customer service team is going to do to remedy this, but God, I don't want to find out. When the kidnapper made me guess where he kept his daughter, I went for the basement and he said, "Correct," allowing me to see her. But when I found her severed head in there, I learned that every other choice would have been correct as well. Did I create a monster? About 15 years ago, when I was 22-ish, my best girl and I went out to bars 3 to 4 plus nights a week, and generally met some interesting people and made new friends. There were a few bars that we hit up more often than others, and one in particular where we knew the bartender/manager pretty well. We went the week of Halloween, and each night their staff would dress up in different costumes. This is where we came across Ron. He was bouncing at the bar and didn't even catch my eye in the slightest as I gave him my ID to get in. Until a few years ago, I never looked anyone in the face. I had to force myself to do it. My girl and I hung out, drank, and danced and met with some people. Then we headed to the bar to chat with our friend. He asked me what I thought about Ron. I had no idea who he meant, and he gestured at the bouncer, to which I was like, meh. He was older looking, very muscular, turned out to be a minor gym rat. I was 22-ish, dressed in black and skulls and platforms, didn't seem my type on the outside, but bartender friend vouched for him, said he was a really cool guy. He asked me if he could give Ron my number, and I figured it would be okay. I hear from him the next day and wanted to hang. At the time, I lived with my uncle and aunt, a pastor and his wife, so he invited me to meet at his place, and we would just go for a casual hang somewhere. Simple, middle-of-the-day chill. I get there and his apartment door is wide open, and his much better-looking, married, and closer to my age, best friend is there. He seemed nice enough, and I didn't feel unsafe as they left the door wide open, and again, my bartender friend had vouched for him. he mentions he needs to grab some office supplies, so the three of us pile into his douchey car and head to the office supply store. We go in, and as we walk in, a pretty girl walks by. He does that head thing and completely stares at her, like obviously following her with his head thing. We aren't together, but I found it rude, so later in the car I mention it. I tell him, "Hey, look, I know we're just hanging out, but don't disrespect me like that. Everyone looks, but be less obvious, and don't make me look like an ass in public." He laughs and tells me that it's hot that I stood up for myself, especially on our first hangout. Okay. We get back to his place and we talk inside and he says, "I like you. You're going to have a ring on your finger by December." Remember, we met Halloween week. So anyway, his friend leaves and we get takeout and hang out and drink and just talk. Turns out he's from the same tiny town that my parents are from, which is a 6 hours south of us. He is a Desert Storm veteran, which means he's more than 20 years older than me, and was back in school to finish his degree, worked full-time during the week and bounced at night and on weekends. Seemed decent. He asked about my tattoos. I had a lot, and we talked about my love of horror and fascination with true crime and serial killers. He seemed interested, but says he doesn't know much about them, so I tell him I'll lend him my encyclopedia of serial killers so it can be like a crash course for him. Maybe a week later, we hang out again and I bring him the book. We hang out multiple times. I even sleep there a few times. One day we're hanging out and day drinking heavily. He says something to me that felt very much like he was getting way too comfortable too fast, like telling me to do something. I told him not to speak to me that way and turned to walk away when he grabbed my head, jerking back. He had grabbed my hair by the base of my neck. I grabbed his hand and he tried to laugh it off, apologizing, saying he didn't mean it to be that rough and trying to act like it was some sort of foreplay. But I cut that off real quick. I wanted to leave, but I was already very buzzed, so I just sat and he said he was going to do some work. I thought I would just let the buzz wear off, head home, and never talk to this guy again. While I'm sitting there, he is working, he suddenly decides to tell me in graphic detail about his favorite serial killer in the book so far, and why. I think the way he was talking about it seemed off, but again, I'm just weighing out my buzz. He starts working on his psychology assignment that studies urban legends and such. He plays video games with horribly creepy content and it creeps me out. I realized later I felt that way because I didn't feel safe with him. I ask him to wait until I'm gone to play it out loud or put on headphones. He laughs at me, tells me he can't believe I'm such a poser. Tells me, "You have all these tattoos and skulls and you're really scared? You look all goth or punk rock, but you're terrified." He laughs his scary laugh. He is really enjoying that this is creeping me out. I don't want to drive even mildly buzzed. I tell him that his reaction is really scaring me. I love scary things, but I realize this guy is enjoying watching me squirm in a really sick way. And he loves it. His face is getting completely serious, and he suddenly tells me that he has his machete under his mattress. I look and see the handle barely sticking out. He tells me he could make me disappear and no one would ever find my body. In that moment, my adrenaline hit. I grabbed my bags and ran to my car. He sort of slowly lumbers behind me, laughing at me and telling me not to leave. I was stone cold sober at this point. Adrenaline, I guess. And start my car, take off about 2 minutes down the road by the mall and just park and slow my breathing down. I call my girl and just unload. For the next week, he texts and calls me over and over, switching between begging to give him another chance and berating me, calling me a poser and a fake. I tell our bartender friend, and he can't believe that Ron did all of those things. He only works with him a few more times and they don't talk. Ron sets his sights on someone new, another chick in her early 20s. Her family owns a Vietnamese restaurant in the same strip as the bar. Bartender tells us Ron has just started seeing her and she ended up pregnant immediately. I asked the bartender to warn her or give her my number, but he never saw her again. I hope and pray that she didn't get stuck with Ron, and every time I'm in that area, I pray that I don't run into him again. He can keep the encyclopedia. I just hope he hadn't picked up any tips from it. The sound of my boyfriend's snoring have always been able to put me to sleep. But he's visiting family, and I can still hear them. Trick or Treat or Trick or Treat, Halloween 2020. Trick or treat, I cried, holding my bag open to the woman standing at the door. I hoped she'd be friendlier than the woman at the last few doors I had knocked on. I knew I was getting too old to trick or treat without being called a creep or a candy snatcher, but I simply couldn't help it. I love this holiday too much. The old lady who opened the door looked at me with tears in her eyes, not saying a word for the first few seconds after my voice had echoed away. I could see the years of pain etched into her weathered face, sagging bags under her eyes. She stared at me with the expression of pure hatred. Then she erupted into a wail. "Please," she screamed, "please don't ask that. Just take all the candy and leave. I can't do this anymore." There was no point to her screaming. It wasn't going to help. Out of everyone, I should know that. I said nothing as I poured the entire bowl into my bag and walked down the steps to the sidewalk. I turned into the driveway for the next house, built exactly the same as the first. I didn't want to keep going. I wanted to go home and sleep and just eat the candy I had collected, but I couldn't. I marched up to the next porch and knocked on the door. It swung open. "Trick or treat!" The door swung open, and there stood the old lady with tears in her eyes. This time, she said nothing and simply threw a piece of candy at me without saying a word. I quietly stepped down the stairs and went to the next identical house. It doesn't matter how much candy I take, my bag never fills. It doesn't matter which house I choose, the lady is always there. I accepted my fate many houses ago. The lady hasn't. Screaming isn't going to help. Clara had sliced the man's body into so many pieces. He was beyond recognition. Even a chainsaw couldn't stop his pursuit, the pieces slowly crawling across the floor towards her. This is not a suicide note. 3 months ago, I learned of my uncle's passing. We weren't particularly close, but he left me one of his houses in the will. I was touched, but just wanted to sell it off. I'm a fairly new father of twin girls and don't need another thing to manage right now. To speed up the process, I decided to travel across the country to live in the house until the sale was assured. My job just required a laptop and a phone, so I was approved to work remotely from the time being. Unfortunately, my wife had to stay at her job, so I had to come alone. At first, I treated it like a mini vacation. I had hoped it would only last a week, but the process was more involved than I thought. I had a realtor taking care of most of the things, but after a month, I'm still here. I noticed things going wrong right away. Stuff was never where I placed it. I see shadows out of the corner of my eye. I've lost track of time constantly. I thought it was caused by stress
or loneliness. Except for the few times the realtor came by with prospective buyers, the house was the quietest place I had ever been in. Before I completely lost my mind, the neighbor came by with a dog. She was an elderly woman who explained that she had been dog sitting while my uncle was in the hospital. Now that I was here, she thought I should take Buster, the golden retriever. I thought the neighbor might have been forgetful because she seemed to think my uncle had just passed last week. Either way, I fell in love with Buster, and his presence was exactly what I needed. I even thought it would be a tremendous present to bring home to my girls. I just hoped my wife would feel the same way. However, even the dog could tell something was wrong with this house. Buster accepted his new living arrangement pretty quickly, but would never willingly go upstairs. This was alright with me at the time. I thought it would make it easier to keep track of him. Then, Buster disappeared. Literally, 1 second he was standing right behind me as I opened the treat jar to give him a snack. My eyes left him for just a moment to put the jar back, and then he was gone. I ran through the whole house calling his name. The kitchen was connected to the living room, and on the other end was the master bedroom and study. And the other end of the kitchen led to the dining room, which was connected to the entrance hall that also led to the living room and the stairs to the second floor. After walking upstairs, you had a choice of right or left along a balcony that overlooked the living room on one side and the entrance on the other. Going left led immediately to a guest room and the game room. Going right led to 2 more guest rooms and a bathroom at the end of the hall. I looked in every room and had to accept that somehow the dog had made it outside, even though there was no doggy door and every door and window had been closed and locked. So I searched the surrounding neighborhood for another hour before giving up. I was thinking about making flyers when I opened the front door and heard Buster scrambling towards me from the kitchen. I was ecstatic, of course, but I just couldn't wrap my head around how I could miss him. I let Buster sleep in the bed with me that night. In hindsight, that was a huge mistake, but it made me feel better at the time. Things picked up at work though, and I soon forgot all about the strangeness surrounding this house. Clients called me constantly, but we were never getting a lot done, and I landed multiple large contracts in a row. I was working around the clock, but I knew I'd be due for promotion once I returned to the home office. Several times I'd get lost in a phone call or a spreadsheet and suddenly find it was nighttime. I'd be so absorbed with work that I'd block out Buster's whining for food or to go outside. I started to set alarms to keep track, but I had too many important clients to slow down. I was on top of the world, but my health was starting to suffer. I'd forget to eat or even sleep sometimes. There was always something else to do or someone else to talk to. I even got better at taking care of Buster. Better than I was taking care of myself, at least. Then my good mood ended with a bang. Literally. Buster was whining behind me as I finished another spreadsheet. Then we both heard a door slam upstairs. For the first time since I brought him inside, Buster ran upstairs by himself. I almost called the cops, but I felt silly with the phone in my hand. I started to doubt I had heard anything at all. And if there was an intruder, surely Buster would have been making more noise. So I mustered all my courage I could manage and crept upstairs with a frying pan as my weapon. It was dark upstairs, but enough moonlight was coming in from the downstairs windows for me to make out Buster standing in front of a bedroom. I had purposely closed every door when I last came through here looking for the lost dog, but this door was now wide open. I flipped on the hallway light, but nothing happened. With no better idea, I raised my frying pan high and walked slowly to the bathroom. There was no windows in here, so it was pure darkness inside. I was terrified. Bizarrely, Buster just looked frozen. His tail stood straight up and he just stood there, pointing towards the door. I tried to take it as a good sign that he still wasn't barking. That's what finally got me through the threshold and into the bathroom. The whole time, my eyes had been getting used to the darkness, and the bathroom was too small for there to have been anyone there without me noticing. I started to relax when I took a step forward into something sticky. I suddenly realized I had my cell phone in my pocket. I pulled it out and I turned it on to cast some light on the floor. I immediately dropped it at the sight of some bright red liquid surrounding my feet. I fled the upstairs, and this triggered Buster to follow. This time, I had no troubles calling the cops. Thankfully, there was already a patrol car nearby, so 2 officers arrived within a couple minutes. Their powerful flashlights cut through the darkness like knives, but they soon found nothing. Nothing was wrong with the upstairs lights. Something did appear to be wrong with my pipes, though, as they called out from above that the puddle was rusty water. Because of their insistence, I climbed up the stairs again and clearly saw a muddy brown puddle in the bathroom. The banging must have been a pipe bursting. Both cops had a laugh at my expense, but were otherwise understanding. They even gave me the number of a good plumber, though my cell phone was ruined after I dropped it and left it in the puddle. I would have to use the landline in the kitchen from now on. I let them out and promised to call the plumber first thing in the morning, yet, as exhausted as I was, I couldn't go to sleep over the excitement, so I stayed up to draft some more important documents for my company. Before I knew it, Buster had made another mess in the living room, and I was dead tired and said something to Buster that maybe I shouldn't have, and did some things to him that I know I really shouldn't have. I had decided to do something about the stress I had been under, and I spoke to my supervisor that same morning. To my surprise, they were happy to let me have the week off as a sort of mental vacation. Just like that, all my outstanding work was taken away. With nothing else to do, I tried to focus on Buster. I played games with him, I fed him a bunch of treats to make up for the earlier neglect. Then I found the first message. I didn't notice it for some time since I had been avoiding the second floor, but I realized I hadn't actually called the plumber. Before doing so, I went upstairs to see if things had gotten any worse. Instead, I immediately saw a message written in red on the hallway wall. It read,
Losing your mind?
For a second, I kinda did. I was scared to death at the thought that somebody had sneaked into my house while I was there, probably when I was sleeping. I won't bear repeating everything I said or did right after. Let's just say I hadn't become any braver since the banging. Eventually, I unlocked my bedroom door and made my way to the kitchen with Buster leading the way. I called the police again. Those same 2 officers were able to show up, and then, slowly, we cleared every inch of the house. Yet, we found no one. Everything was locked, no sign of forced entry. The police actually took me seriously, something that bewildered me at the time, and admitted that this isn't the first house in the neighborhood to experience this. There has been a series of break-ins where nothing was stolen, but the police officers still offered to have a car sit outside for the night. Even though I took them up on this, I soon realized that I never get sleep tonight in this house. So I called my only friend in town, and really in the whole state, an old college roommate who coincidentally lived 30 minutes away. He offered to pick me and Buster up in a few hours, so I busied myself with packing my suitcase. I didn't know how long we'd be gone for, so I pretty much packed everything I had brought with me to the house in the first place. I left the room to pick up some doggy toys when my friend called to say he was waiting outside. I decided to hang up the phone and meet him immediately. I needed the human company, and he could help me move my stuff. But the driveway was empty. There was no friend, no car. I called him back immediately, and he insisted he was outside. I listened to him get out of his car and walk up to the front door. He knocked, and I could hear the door open, and an elderly woman greet him. My friend asked my name and mentioned my uncle. The woman said she had never heard of either of us. After thanking her, my friend left and asked me if I had gotten all that. I told him I must have given him the wrong address. He rattled off the correct one and confirmed he was there. After asking him to wait, I left my house again. I walked out to the street and looked back at the number written on the curb and on the mailbox. Only there weren't any numbers. Just a message.
Losing your mind?
On the curb, written in red. The temptation to leave right away was great. I could just start walking and never stop. But I had to get my stuff, and more importantly, Buster, so I entered the house one last time. When I came back to the room, my suitcase was empty. Everything I had spent the last hour packing was back in its proper place. Despite how impossible this was, I focused on only one goal. We need to leave. I put a leash on Buster and was shocked to see how haggard he was. I resolved to make it up to him when this was all over. I tried to leave out the front door like nothing was wrong, but I couldn't open it. The knob turned freely, but the deadbolt wouldn't slide back. I was really scared now, but Buster's presence helped. I knelt down to give him a hug, and he gave me an idea while licking my face. Whatever was happening, it sure wasn't the result of a maniac hiding in my house. Still, I didn't know what forces were actually opposing me, so I walked to the backyard and said loudly, "Well, Buster, time for a little walk." The glass door slid open easily. Buster bounded out happily. I guess it had been a long time since I had let him outside. I followed more attentively and, for the first time, examined the backyard closely. There was an iron fence surrounding the yard with another space between the bars that Buster could slip through. And then I saw it, a tree that grew too close to the fence and had several branches extending through and above it. I assumed the gate would be supernaturally locked too, so this was my exit. Buster didn't need any prodding. He waited patiently for me on the other side as I painfully pulled myself up and over the fence. I was suddenly aware of how weak and tired my recent lifestyle had made me. When I was in the process of climbing down the tree on the other side, Buster growled once and then took off like a shot towards a nearby hill. I jumped down and gave chase. He disappeared over the top, and I scrambled to keep up on the surprisingly steep surface. Luckily, I found where someone had laid some stone brick into the side for an easier way up. It was still steep enough that I had to focus on placing my feet correctly to keep from sliding, so I was looking down when my next reached up resulted in my hand grabbing carpet. Confused, I looked up to see the second floor landing. I looked down to see the rest of the stairs that led to the entrance hall and living room of the house. Buster was nowhere to be found. Demoralized and dead tired, I crawled the final step and just sat on the landing for a while. occasionally calling for Buster. Eventually, the kitchen phone rang. Whatever ghosts were messing with me, I realized they couldn't stop outside forces from helping. I tumbled down the stairs in my haste and landed hard on the cold tile below. But I was only dazed for a second, and soon I was in the kitchen with a phone in my hand. My wife's warm voice filled me with hope. She was concerned that she hadn't heard from me in a while. I couldn't recall the last time I had even tried. She was trying to tell me my work hadn't heard from me in a week, while I tried to tell her to call the police. Her words gave me pause though. I asked, "What do you mean? I was given a week off."
Dear, I thought you were supposed to continue working as soon as you got there.
Yeah, but they gave me a week off because of all the stress I have been under. Wait a second. How long have I been out here?
Honey, you've been gone almost 9 days now.
My stomach sunk, but I didn't hesitate to say, "Listen, you need to call the cops. Something is wrong. I think I'm having a medical emergency." I had been trying to come up with an excuse to limit the amount of follow-up questions, but I ended up realizing this actually was most likely the explanation. Maybe I was just suffering from a gas leak or a brain tumor. Ironically, either of those options seemed preferable than living in a haunted house. My wife asked,
Baby, what's wrong? Are you okay?
I thought I saw a shadow move out of the corner of my eye as I answered, "Yes, I'm okay, but no, I need help. There's something wrong about this house."
You aren't making any sense.
"Just listen to me. Call the police and tell them my uncle's name. Tell them to come to my house and an ambulance might be needed. Please help me."
Please help you. Pretty please, with a cherry on top.
I stared at the phone in my hand as my wife's voice continued to come out of it. It sounded like her, but in a mocking tone I've never actually heard from her before. She said,
Did your tummy hurt? When's the last time you ate? I wonder what Buster tastes like.
I slammed the phone down, but whatever it was on the other side was right. My stomach was hurting. I couldn't remember the last time I had eaten. On cue, I heard Buster whining from upstairs. Only after I started running towards the stairs did I notice just how bruised and sore my legs were from the spill down those steps. I pushed through the pain and climbed the stairs yet again. Buster was back in front of the bathroom, lying on his side, looking thinner than I had ever seen him.
Losing your mind?
Was written all over the hallway now, including on the ceiling and floor. I no longer had any doubt the message was written in blood. Some of them were still dripping. I walked over and picked up Buster while a banging started at my front door. I would have jumped if Buster hadn't been weighing me down. I heard the front door open and whoever was identified themselves as the police. I even recognized the voice as belonging to one of the officers who had visited previously. Why can't I remember his name? After calling out that I was upstairs, I turned with Buster and found the hallway stretched before me, many times its original length. Despite how thin he looked, Buster was heavier than ever. I knew this was just some sort of trick to not get me in touch with the police officer. I thought I must really have been talking to my wife. She had come through with calling the police and the ghost had just destroyed the end of the call. So I started my trek back to the stairs and shuffled my feet as fast as I could, yelling all the way. But then a voice answered the police officer. A woman's voice. My wife's voice. I could hear her say,
I'm sorry, my husband wasn't feeling well. He's resting in the bedroom. Can I help you?
I screamed as loud as I could just to get his attention. But it was no use. I heard the officer say, I'd like to check up on him all the same.
Sure, come in. He's right through here.
It was right out of a nightmare. I was sweating profusely, while every step seemed to get me nowhere. Tried to speed up, but the hallway just stretched further. And then I heard a man's blood-curdling scream from downstairs. Suddenly, the hallway snapped back, and I found myself somehow right on top of the stairs. My momentum couldn't be stopped. I fell down the stairs and landed hard on top of Buster. He howled in pain, but at least he was alive. I saw a long, thick trail of blood go around the corner and under my closed bedroom door. There was still a shadow of something under the door. I painfully crept to the kitchen and grabbed my trusty frying pan before making my way back to the bedroom door as quietly as I could. My eyes watched the moving shadow nervously. Whatever was waiting there had killed a man. That meant it could kill me. But if it could physically impact, then surely it had to be vulnerable to physical impact too. So I raised my frying pan and slowly started to turn the handle. Before I had much progress, the door flew open on its own and something turned suddenly to me. I swung my frying pan down. The cop stood before me, a smile frozen on his face. We both looked down at the knife plunged into his chest, my hand still wrapped around the handle. He fell to the side and I fell backwards to sit heavily on the now clean floor. I was positive I had picked up the frying pan. I could remember its weight, but now I also remembered going to the kitchen and pulling out the knife. I seriously wondered if I was losing my mind. I looked down to find I had the knife in my hand again. I dropped it at once and crawled back to check on Buster. He wasn't moving. I put my hand on his flank and was devastated to feel he was still warm, but not breathing. I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. I didn't do nothing for a long time. I was lethargic, but somehow I made it to the couch in the living room. I waited there until nightfall, and then I slept on the couch. When I woke up, I was waiting some more. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but nothing horrible was happening to me while I waited. I wasn't in a hurry to change that, but the bodies of Buster and the cop were still there. I needed to do something. My stomach rumbled as I finally got off the couch. That was another problem with just staying put. First things first, I found a shovel in an outdoor closet attached to the backyard porch. Digging the hole was exhausting, so I settled for just burying Buster now. I planned on getting the cop after finding something to eat. I picked up Buster and carried him outside. His fur was still so warm. It was hard to believe he was gone, but there was no life behind his big brown eyes. I gently laid him down in the hole and got to work. Sometime later, I wandered into the kitchen and raided the pantry. The house was quiet apart from my efforts. Whenever I stopped moving, the silence was complete. I wondered if the ghosts had just been trying to make me murder after all. Now that their goal had been met, maybe they would leave me alone for a while. Just in time, because I was starving and I didn't need any more distractions. I opened up a box of cereal and had a handful up to my lips when I paused. How could I tell I was actually eating what I was looking at? What if I had actually opened a box of rat poison? I still wasn't sure what these ghosts were capable of. I imagined the food turning into worms after it was already in my mouth. With that thought, I threw the cereal on the ground and stomped off, no longer hungry. I needed to concentrate my efforts on leaving this place. Right on cue, I walked by the front door. It was wide open. Instinctively, I made a leap for it before stopping with an outstretched hand just a foot short from the door. This had to be another trick. I could see the door slamming shut in my face, or even taking a few of my fingers with it. I could feel the breeze enter the house, but I was too scared to move. This was the most impossible situation I had ever been in or ever heard of. All of my senses had failed me before. However, my need for freedom eventually caused my feet to move. Upon exiting the house, I saw the cop car just sitting in my driveway. The door was unlocked and the keys were sitting in the front seat. My mind went wild trying to explain the situation. Maybe the cop was secretly a murderer and had killed previous owners of this house. Maybe his sacrifice had helped them move on. I couldn't think of any other explanation for my good luck at this time, but I just pushed my misgivings down and got in. I drove out of the neighborhood without incident, but I had a new problem. I was in an unfamiliar city driving a cop car with no money or any belongings on me, and I had no idea what to do next. So I kept driving. It felt good to be free of that house. It felt good to see the sun, so I kept driving on and on. Left turn, right turn, left turn, right turn. No idea where I was going. And then I realized I hadn't seen any other cars on the road for some time. Where was everyone? Where was I? The sinking feeling happened again, in the pit of my stomach, but also around my whole body. I sunk back into the chair seat and then realized I was sitting in an armchair, back in the living room of my uncle's house. My arms were up like I was still holding on to a steering wheel. I started to cry with frustration as I stood up and screamed. How long had I been sitting there with a stupid grin, moving my arms up and down like a madman? I turned around and saw my work laptop on the dining room table. It was on and glowing at me. I walked over to it and saw that something was already written down in this post. It read,
Lost your mind? Good. Now you won't mind losing the rest.
I erased the message and started to type out a request for help. I ignored the screen and just focused on the keys, but I kept hitting them wrong and another message slowly formed.
I'm sorry I've disappointed you all for the last time. Goodbye.
I could have screamed again, but I noticed something had changed. I wasn't in the dining room anymore. I was in the study. I kept writing and writing and writing, and my own words started to come out. I have sent out emails requesting help. I have posted on local police departments' Facebooks for assistance, and I've been trying to keep writing no matter what. This is my last attempt to keep my sanity. Whenever I try to take a break, I find myself in a new room with new horrors descending on me. Once I opened the study door out to a hellish landscape and almost stepped out onto lava. I wasn't sure if it was all an illusion, but I didn't even want to have a vision of my feet burning, so I just closed the door and resumed writing. I'm not even sure this is all because of ghosts. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and the truth is simply that I have no idea what's going on. As I've gone over the crazy events, I realize that I can't recall my uncle's name, or what he looked like. I'm not sure I even had an uncle. I'm trying to think really hard on how I came here. Did I fly? Drive? I can't remember. Have I always been here? Even weirder, I can't remember my realtor's name, or even what gender they are. I met them in person several times. Why don't I know things I should? I can't even remember the name of my daughters or my wife. Am I even a father? Am I even a person? I know I must be, because here I am writing in a small study, but now that I think about it, I can't remember who my parents are, what they look like, or anything about my childhood. Now, I just remember this house and all the nightmares, waking and otherwise, I've experienced here. I'm feeling a lot like I was back in the cop car. I found a way forward, but I really don't know what to do next. This is not the way to live, and I'm getting more and more tired. I'm so hungry, and I'm finding it hard to focus. I keep hearing voices, and they're getting louder. I know if I stop writing, I won't last long. But I'm running out of things to say. My hands are tired. I'm tired. So tired. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. I need to keep writing, but I don't know what to say anymore. What's my name? I don't know. I'll die if I stop writing. I'll die if I stop working. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dogs. Buster. I miss Buster. I wish I could pet him one last time. But was he even real? Is anything? I'm so tired. So hungry. I need to focus. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy goodbye. The quick brown... I'm sorry. Jumped over point. Your lazy dogs. Bye. I jumped, I disappear, thrill. Last time, lazy dogs. I'm sorry. Jumped over, disappointed. You're lazy. For the lazy dogs, goodbye. I'm sorry. I've disappointed you all for the last time. Goodbye.
The old gypsy woman told me that I would die at the stroke of midnight. I was skeptical, but decided to stay up anyway. As the left side of my body went completely numb, I realized that English was probably not her first language. I'm on a research expedition to the Arctic Circle, and we uncovered a colossal and mysterious machine frozen beneath the ice. Written by Darkly Gathers. The machine is gigantic. I do not know what it is comprised, but it appears as a monolith of faded steel, frozen behind the walls of an icy glacier. Glimpses of ancient cogs and gears, of taut mechanic tendons the color of mist, are shown to us fleeting through the Arctic fog. We stand here on the cliffside, us 12, scientists, researchers. There is a clank as the floodlights are set up and burst into life. Great yellow beams shine out across the waters and onto the glacier. Our visibility is improved, but not by a great deal. I shiver as I glance down at my phone. My husband is calling me. I love the man, but he has a real skill for calling at the worst possible times. As much as I love to hear his voice, if I answer, well, I'll have to indulge in a long, drawn-out conversation, and I just don't have the time. The signal would probably cut out halfway through anyway. I don't have the energy. My heart lurches with homesickness as I think about him, as I think about our son. But I slip my thumb out of my glove and cancel the call, returning the phone to the pocket of my jacket. I am needed here. What lies before us is a discovery of immense, perhaps incalculable, historical significance. The sounds of jets tear through the air overhead, distant but still loud over the constant whistle of the wind. They're doing loops, I think, round and round, keeping tabs as best they can, given the weather. We kept the discovery a secret for a month, which is pretty impressive by our standards. Studying the great machine as best we could, taking samples from the ice, gauging its size, theorizing on its purpose. But the presence of an enormous and sudden crack down the glacier side a couple days ago saw Bernie, the science officer in command, reluctantly make the necessary call to the military. As much as we don't want to believe it, this thing could be dangerous. It could be a weapon. One of the soldiers stands next to me on the cliffside, binoculars against his eyes. I don't know his rank or whatever. I've always been confused by army stuff.
It ain't the Russians,
he informed me yesterday.
Cameron doesn't know a thing about it, or so they say, and there's really no one else who have gotten something like this all the way up here.
He scratches his jaw.
The crack's deepening,
he mutters. I squint through the haze. I'm about to reach for my own binoculars, but I don't need them. I can see from here. My breath clouds by my mouth as the crack darkens and shoots suddenly further out and down across the glacier. The accompanying noise is brutal in its volume, much, much louder than you expect. The rest of the team is alert at once. The whole crack's gonna break away in a minute, says Bernie to my right, his thick brown beard bristling with frost. McGowan, the soldier that is, lifts his radio and turns away, issuing sharp orders into the receiver. Bernie swears, running a hand over his head.
We're going to lose the GPS unit, aren't we, Olivia?
I grimace. Looks that way. I'm sorry, Bernie. He shakes his head.
It's alright, please. It's no one's fault. I should have picked it up when I had the chance.
He and I had been part of the helicopter team that set the device up on the glacier's peak. We had a chance to retrieve the equipment before the military involvement, but chose not to take it. They forbid us from returning to collect it. And now? The glacier cracked again. The crack itself descended down below the dark and icy water. And with a rumble, powerful and ethereal and inherently arctic, the closest chunk of the glacier breaks from the larger whole. It falls slowly with a rolling boom that echoes like thunder through the valleys of ice and snow. And the resulting waves are enormous. The sheer scale of the force of nature that we find in this polar world never ceases to awe and amaze me. A section of the machine, no longer obscured by the ice, becomes clear as the spray of the sea is carried away on the winds. It's bewildering in its intricacy. The organization of chaos of its mechanical joints, its levers, pistons, and pulleys, its plates and coils, grids, bars, and wheels, is nothing short of staggering. It is difficult to distinguish one piece from another, not least because of the wisp of mist that thoughtlessly drifts across our line of sight, but also due to their coloring. They are all glistening in almost exactly the same shade of pale, stone-like gray, with the occasional flash of silver. Silver, and then something else. Sparks of blue. All across the machine, even in the parts obscured by the ice of the remaining glacier, dozens upon dozens of little blue lights begin to appear, glowing dutifully through the haze. And then the machine starts to whirl. I take a step back in alarm. We all do, I think. Bernie is issuing commands to the team to his right. The soldier is shouting into his radio, but I hear neither. I hear only the sad and soulful song of an ancient being awakening. Because that's what this thing is. I can't say how I realized so soon why it was this moment that I decided upon the truth. But I see it. I can feel it. This is no ordinary machine. We knew it never was, of course, but it was more than even that. It's a being. And the being rises. The glacier is steadily torn apart from the inside as the wheels and spokes of the steel begin to grind. They turn and they crank and they whistle, displacing the sea beneath as it staggers and cracks in the return to life. The light of the blue flicker and flash. Ice is forced to the side, cracking and slipping and falling slowly down to strike the surface of the sea below, throwing up great dark waves as it does so, and the machine unfolds. Pieces and parts the size of cars, or bigger, twist and crank out of strange angles. The wheels turn, and we are powerless to do a thing but watch, spectators to a unique and impossible awakening.
What on God's green earth?
The soldier muttered, far lower in his voice. I don't blame him. The fear shudders also through me. But we are a long way from God's green earth this evening. A long, long way indeed. The machine's form is roughly humanoid. It rises up out of the ice, its head hanging low between its shoulder, juddering slightly forward. Its left arm unfolds from its back, twisting and clattering around its colossal body with a juddering of pistols and grinding of gears. Stretching out, the machine puts its left hand upon a nearby cliff of pure white. Ice cracks and tumbles from between its enormous metal fingers and cascades down the cliffside into the water. Its right arm disconnects from its chest with a spray of loose ice. The machine holds this appendage out before it. It looks down at its hand, turning it this way and that, and slowly clenches its fingers with a metallic groan. This arm is darker than the other, stained almost black in places, and its hand is 1 finger short. The machine stands waist deep in water, surrounded by floating chunks of ice, and with enormous creak, it raises its head, its eyes 2 great and blue searchlights through the icy Arctic mist.
Lord have mercy,
McGowan whispered in my left, his uniform whipping ragged in the rising wind. Bernie stands in silence, his hands on his head. My pulse races, and I feel something deep inside, somewhere strange, my soul perhaps? I do not know exactly what it is that I now gaze upon, but it is ancient and powerful beyond comprehension. Just looking at it now, I can tell that this thing was designed by no modern man. There's just no way. I have spoken of its gears and wheels, its plates and pistons. I have compared the size of its various aspects to cars. But visually, This machine has no equal, no counterpart. There is nothing man-made that I can think of now to which this is all comparable. Not really. The other 11 who stand along me on this cliffside. I do not know all their full names. I do not know their histories. I do not know their fears. But we are all one now, forever bonded by this moment, connected in perpetuity, for better or for worse. The machine has a jaw of sorts. It grinds and creaks. Colossal cogs turn in the hollows of its face. And it speaks. The language is not one that I know. It sounds vaguely Arabic, or perhaps Hebrew? I'm not a linguistic. I could not say, but its voice is deep, roughly masculine. It rolls through the air and crashes like waves upon the icy cliffs all around. Pearson shivers through me as a river, goosebumps arising across my skin, and I take another step back, eyes affixed to the glowing blue lamps beyond the mist. Bernie takes a few shaky steps back. He crouches down and retrieves the megaphone from the box of supplies. It's for emergency uses, you understand, to help issue orders above the wind. He steps back up alongside and takes a deep breath. Then he raises the megaphone to his mouth.
Hello?
He stammers, his voice loud through the device carried on the air.
Friend from beneath the ice, we come here to study you. It is a pleasure to meet you.
His voice catches in his throat, and he draws his welcome to a close.
This ain't possible. This just can't be.
McGow mutters, but I do not turn to look at him. I watch as the metal colossus tilts its head with a grinding of the gears, its steel fingers tightening on the cliffside to its left, and more ice is knocked free. There is a whirling that rises loud from the whirling in its chest, louder and louder till it peak. Then the being's eyes flash bright, and the whirling fades. Down it dwindles, back behind the wind, and it replies.
Friend, yes, beneath the ice.
It looks slowly to the left, then to its right, then down at the water. Each movement is steady and controlled, accompanied by the noise of groaning metal and clunking pistols. Such alien sounds up here in the wilderness of the far north.
Who are you?
Bernie asks through the megaphone, trying to keep in command of his breathing.
Your form is unfamiliar to us. Can you share your origin?
The machine raises its head. The fog between us is once again illuminated in the blue glare of its eyes. It says a word that I do not recognize.
Nephilim,
comes the voice.
I am of the Nephilim. Where are my brothers?
With the splittering of the ice and the great wash of the sea below, the machine rises a little higher out of the waters. He tilts his head to look up at the swirling, white-gray snow sky above. Bernie does not know how to respond. We watch as the machine's eyes flicker through a series of colors. He remains rigid in place, gears and wheels all still as his eyes flash through gray, then white, then teal, then back to blue over and over. This goes on for perhaps a minute more, then his body returns to life. His eyes go back to their uniform blue, and his fingers clench into a fist upon the white cliffside, shattering the rock and ice beneath it in bursts and clusters. It showers down towards the water as his voice lowers.
They are no more. I have been left behind.
Thunder rolls in the distance as the wind begins to whip up into a gale.
My brothers are gone. I have been left behind.
Great clouds of steam suddenly burst from the machine's side, out from his shoulders like enormous wings that rise and bellow and spread over and across the sky. The substance seems both smoke-like and liquid. It hangs impossibly in the air, wet and thick, and across its form I see the memories of the machine. Like pictures on a shimmering screen, but with depth, I share the feelings of the memories. I feel them within my own head as I stare at them. I can place myself in the depicted scene with ease. I can reach out a hand if I so choose, so far and yet so close. I could reach out. I could touch the steam as it rises far out across the water, up and above the ice and into the sky. The vision in the steam shows me memories of rain, great sheets of it, a raging torrent that thunders down hard into the rising pools, train up the sand and the dirt and the grass of all the gentle slopes into thick, malevolent mudslides. There I see the machine, his metal shinier, brighter, through the plastered as if in the muck thrown up by the downpour. His eyes flash bright as he works alongside another still, hosting enormous beams of wood, connecting them hastily into the counterparts as parts of the body of a huge wooden boat. Resin is thrown between the beams, and they are slotted one by one into place, the finishing touches to the king of all vessels, an ark. A bearded man and his 3 sons raises the beams on the opposite side with a makeshift crane. The man calls out to the machines, his voice deep and desperate, and the machines reply in turn. Lightning cracks through the sky, and the surrounding dooms are illuminated in a flash. More of the machines are made clear. The vision grants me glimpses of an angry horde of men and women, incredulous in their fury, on top of their horses and on top of the hills, scrambling over each other, screaming their hatred. I feel their hatred. I feel their terror. And the machines stand with them and against them, eyes blue, eyes gold, eyes silver, shining in the darkness and glowing in the gloom. The crane collapses under the strain of the rain. The sons of the bearded men are drawn into the enormous boat as the apparatus crashes down with a splash and a crunch into the rising water. I see again the machine before me in the vision. He stands defiant between the mob and the ark. The images shimmer and change. The memory is replaced by another. The rains disappear. The sky is shown in a steam of brightness, from black to the orange-purple of the evening sunset over the desert. A gargantuan tower of stone, pillared and layered, taller than any structure I've ever seen, and still, as yet unfinished, rises from the rough ground and strikes up proudly towards the sky. Palm trees sway far below like toys in a warm breeze, and the people work as one. Their efficiency is fluid. The machines are there. I see the one from the ice. They work with the people, a myriad of colors and creeds. The people are proud. They are fearless in their arrogance. The wooden machine of man and the metal machines of old hoist the stone and the brick, and the tower grows. The tower grows, and above it the sky splits apart. A river of white gold cuts through the orange of the sky and the purple of the clouds like waves. The very air is pushed aside as a rippling circle of energy is blown from the tear in the sky and shudders out and over the world below. Walls of dust are thrown up from the ground, and the foundations of the tower, strong as they are, begin to shake. The people forgot themselves in the chaos. Their arrogance evaporates. The enormous machines, the metal beings, as if following a new and suddenly issued command, they halted their tasks, one by one, no longer working in the people's aid. They choose instead to stand between the colors and the creeds. The people find their language lost and changed. Anger and confusion erupts across the great site, and the unity is shattered. The machines encourage the disarray. Some, it would seem, reluctantly. Others with perhaps greater enthusiasm. It is difficult to say. The machine from the ice is of the former. That much is clear. The tower is left unfinished, abandoned, and forgotten. As the years pass, it crumbles into decay. And the scene changes again. Only one machine visible now, the one from the ice. He stands beneath a red Egyptian sky beside the pharaoh, robed in gold. Hands clenched tightly to the stone of his royal balcony, overlooking a kingdom in chaos. The machine turned to the pharaoh, eyes bright and flashing in the darkness. He speaks, but the pharaoh throws out his hand dismissively. The man's only response is a bellow of rage as he turns and retreats into the shadows of his halls. The water of the Nile is thick and dark. It reflects the scarlet of the sky and absorbs it, deeper perhaps than it should. It flows and sticks to the surrounding banks and docks like blood, poisoned. Frogs swarm the steps of the temples, and the night black flies swarm in the air. Their ceaseless buzzing is overcome only by the abrupt cracks of thunder across the sky. And following these terrible sounds, through the clouds come great stones of fire. Burning hail streaks violently down to the pharaoh's domain. They crash violently amongst the buildings in a burst of white and blinding yellow, casting up great clouds of ash and fire and dust and rock as they do. The atmosphere is taken over by panic. The machine, obvious as a beacon of blue amongst the havoc, does his best to protect the nearest home. The smaller of these burning stones he's able to knock away, losing parts and small clutches of metal from his arm in the process, pieces flying up and away in a rain of steel as he struggles under the strain. He cries out loud, a deep, metallic reverberation roaring up to the sky, and the vision fades. The images are lost. I am disconnected from the intimate intensity of the memories, though their impact lingers. The steam dissipates. Lost behind the Arctic fog, it fades quickly into nothing. I become again instantly aware of the biting, bitter cold all around. I raise a hand to wipe away the tears as I make my return to the world of white. I shoot a glance down the line. The others saw it all too. It's plain on their faces. The emotion is sharp. But what does it all mean? What exactly am I supposed to make of all these ancient, heart-wrenching memories of the machine? I have an idea, sure, but the implications are too much for me to process all at once. The wind is icy against my exposed skin, the gears grinding in the machine.
Did I make any difference?
It asked into the air.
Did I make any impact? I stood with Noah, I stood against the Pharaoh, and now, here I stand, alone. My brothers are gone, they're all gone.
The machine closes his eyes, and for a minute the great blue lamps go dark. A voice crackles through the soldier's radio to my left. It's difficult to make out over the wind, but it sounds like a desperate request for orders. I look at the man, brow furrowed, jaw set like stone. He does not understand everything that he has seen, but he makes a choice nonetheless. McGowan leaves the radio unanswered and dropped it into the snow. We hear the jets roar by on their loop, harmless overhead. With the crack of a beam and a low thundering of pistols, the glowing blue lights of the machine's eyes reappear through the mist.
All gone in an instant,
He said sadly.
There is nothing for me here.
The machine casts one long, final look across us all. Us 12 stood watching on the cliffside, and then he turns. Slowly but steadily he leaves the shattered remains of his glacier behind, and he pushes his way through the waters, the waves lurching and rolling in his wake, and his great titanic form disappears gradually into the mist. Impulsively, I reached out and grabbed the megaphone from Bernie's hand. I bring it up to my mouth. "Wait!" I call out to the icy fog. "Please!" But the machine does not. His silhouette fades from sight, and the bright blue sparks across his form are lost to the haze. We watch as one of the wind's whirling clouds of snow from the surrounding cliffs bellow them up and out into the winter's white. You might wonder why we didn't immediately head to the nearest helicopter or boat or whatever and try to follow the machine to see where he planned to go. I don't know really. To tell the truth, even if we tried, I don't think we would have been able to. I don't think the machine wanted to be followed. So we packed up, we ambled back to the trucks in a daze, and we began the long return drive to the station. We sit now in silence as the engine judders and the scene outside rolls by, but it's difficult to think, difficult to process. I do come to one realization though, one quite clear indeed. I make a decision. I slide off my glove and I draw my phone from my pocket. I scroll down to my husband's number, and I smile as I tap his name, and I bring the device up to my ear. "Oh God," my victim cried before I put a bullet in his brain. "Why can't you people be more creative?" he sighed as his brain pushed the bullet back out. "Your wife picked up your kids a half an hour ago, sir." I rushed out so fast I didn't tell the school that I didn't have a wife, and began to cry as I realized I was finally free of those filthy animals. Decisions by the Prophetic C. He had a stupid fudging smile on his face, so happy with himself, while he held a gun to my wife's head. I tried to yell something so he would take the fudging gun away, but my mouth was taped shut. My hands and feet were bound to the chair with rope. On the other side of the gunman was my son, terrified and crying. "Well, good morning, sleepyhead. I was starting to think I'd have to wake you up myself." He grinned even wider. "You're probably wondering what's going on, or why is this happening to me? And let me tell you, this isn't the time for you to get any answers. In fact, it's me who wants an answer." He moved the hand the gun was in, and now the pistol was pointed at my son. I tried to lunge from the chair, but the ropes kept me in place. My wife began to cry even harder, her eyes pleading for me to do something. anything. So, which one? I was so worried about my son that it took me a second to really hear what he was saying. He wanted me to pick between my son or my wife. I tried to yell, to talk, but the tape held firm. No, you don't need to speak, friend. Simply nod in the direction of the one you want to die. That's all you have to do. If you don't pick in the next 2 minutes, I'll shoot them both. Those are the rules. He set down a little kitchen clock timer on the table in front of me, and it started. It began to tick down, almost painfully quick. I knew there was no way out of this situation, and I looked at my wife, who I had married all those years ago. She looked at me, tears in her eyes, but she knew the choice I would make. I knew that she wanted it too. I nodded to my wife's directions. My eyes stared at the gunman the whole time. He nodded and shot her in the head without hesitation. My son began to scream and cry even harder at the sound and seeing his mother dead on the ground. Without another word, the man went out through the kitchen, and I heard the back door slam. He was gone. I stared at my wife's body for a long time as I heard the sirens in the distance. The police broke through the front door and cut me and my son free, searching the house for clues or anything that would give them a lead. I held my son close to my chest, comforting him as I tried my best to answer the detective's questions. I didn't stop looking at her body until the coroner took her away. It was hours before everything was finished up, and the last of the police left. I took my boy upstairs to lay him down in the room before I thought better and took him to mine. I placed the child next to me and covered him up. I watched him sleep for a while as I pulled out my burner phone I had bought a week ago and turned it on. There was already a message waiting. I hope the act was convincing enough for your son. I'll be ready for my payout when you get the life insurance check. Thanks for doing business. I turned off the phone and made a mental note to destroy it in a fire pit in the next few days. I'd have to wait to burn her stuff, but I was a patient man. I planned things out. The stupid witch never should have cheated on me. I finished my final perfect pirouette to thunderous applause. If only I could speak and tell the little girl who owned my music box of the living hell I'm trapped in. My wife was replaced by I Stan Catwoman. Darling, you fell asleep at the wheel, my wife told me. Thankfully, I was able to wake you up before we could skid off the road. She spoke with a concerned tone. Yeah, you're probably right, I replied. And I was convinced that was what happened. I must have fallen asleep and dreamed about seeing a bright light in the sky emitting from a huge disc-like object. I mean, how outlandish is that? To think that we had seen some sort of alien spacecraft? Vishkahi and I laughed about it for a while before we went back to unpacking. You see, we were returning home from a road trip. It was late at night and the street was empty. Then suddenly, I saw what seemed like a scene from a horror movie. A light, the brightness of which was unlike anything I had seen before, descending from what looked like a disc-shaped void. That's the best way I can explain it. This disc wasn't even black, but somehow darker and could be easily distinguished from the night sky. It blinded me momentarily, and when I came to, the light was gone, and my wife, Vishkahi, or V as I like to call her, was frantically asking if I was okay. I asked what happened to the bright light. She gave me a confused look and asked what I was talking about. She said that I had fallen asleep while driving and must have had a dream. She took the wheel after that and drove us home, as I clearly in no condition to do so. About a week after the incident, I began to notice that something was different about V. For one thing, she had become sexually insatiable. My wife has always had a great sex drive, but now she seemed to want sex all the time. As soon as she came home from work, she would take me to the shower, then the couch, then the bed, and then the shower again. I couldn't complain, but the sudden spike in her libido did seem a bit strange. We never used condoms, as she had had a barolateral septalgectomy years ago. Neither of us wanted children. One night, when we had finished several rounds of great sex, we were lying in bed. I had my arm around her, and she rested her head on my chest, her back towards the window. I was running my fingers through her silky hair and reveling in the post-coitus bliss, when suddenly my tranquility was shattered. This same light I had seen, or thought I had seen on that empty stretch of road, was now shining above my neighbor's house. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. The blinding light lasted no more than a few seconds before it vanished. It was as if it had never been there in the first place. I turned around to find V standing there looking bewildered. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" she asked back. "The same damn light I saw the night on that road. Come on, don't tell me you didn't see it," I said, exasperated. My wife came close to me and placed a hand on my cheek and told me I was probably tired and was seeing things. I told her again that it was there. She smiled and told me again that there was no light there, that I was just tired and needed to be relaxed. I would have protested further had she not gotten down on her knees and wrapped her lips around my you-know-what. The pleasure I felt bolted out any reflection. By the time I got dressed for work the next morning, I had convinced myself that she was probably right, and I had just hallucinated. Apart from her new sexual appetite, V's behavior changed in other ways as well. She seemed to be growing very distant from her friends and family. I ran into her best friend one day and she asked me if V was okay. She said V hadn't returned her calls or texts. I told her she was probably busy and that I would talk to her. V had been paying for her grandmother's assisted living and made it a point to visit her at least once a week. One evening, V's grandma called me. She was clearly distressed and told me that V hadn't called her or come to visit in weeks. In fact, the last time she had seen V was the day before we left for our road trip, which was over a month ago. The poor woman sounded heartbroken. I told her I was sorry and promised her that I would speak to V about this. That night, after recovering from torrid sex, I mustered the energy to ask V why she hadn't spoken to her grandmother in so long. At first she looked confused, then a look of recollection dawned on her face as she replied, "Oh right, yeah, I'll see her soon." I suggested we invite Grandma over for lunch to make it up for her. I knew for a fact she loved her granddaughter's cooking. Vishkahi agreed. That Saturday, we made lunch for the three of us. I picked up her grandmother and brought her over. V hugged her, as she always did, but there was something off about that hug. I can't put my finger on what it was, it just seemed wrong. As V and I were setting the table for lunch, she knocked over a bottle of wine. And I mean, she deliberately knocked it down. It fell from the counter and shattered. I just stared at V for a few seconds, perplexed. She said it was an accident, but it sure didn't look like one to me. I decided to not make a big deal about it. She implored me to go to the liquor store nearby and get another bottle. On my way to and from the store, I couldn't help but ponder over V's strange behavior. Why had she become so distant from her loved ones? Why did she knock over the wine bottle? And did she actually do that, or did I dream that up as well? Should I talk to her about it, or should I let this slide? Was I overthinking this? As it turned out, I wasn't going to get much peace of mind, regardless of whether I confronted Vashni or not. When I came home from the store, V's grandmother was lying on the floor. V stood over her. The look on her face can only be described as a combo of mild annoyance and amusement. I rushed to Grandma to check on her. She was unconscious. I was about to check her pulse when V told me she had already done that and that her grandma was dead. I was shocked by the coldness in her voice, but this wasn't the time to dwell on that. I called the emergency hotline. The paramedics confirmed that she was dead. We later learned that it was a massive heart attack. I finally asked V what exactly had happened. She nonchalantly told me that Grandma had been walking to the kitchen when suddenly she clutched her chest and fell over. I couldn't get over V's tone. What was wrong with her? She had always been such a loving granddaughter. The V I knew would have been crushed by her grandmother's demise. The woman who stood in front of me seemed like a completely different person, and I was scared of her. I decided to sleep in the guest bedroom that night, in despite of V's attempts to seduce me, and later to guilt-trip me into sleeping with her. I lay in bed awake, wondering what the hell was going on. All the evidence points to a completely natural cause for my wife's grandmother's death. Logically, I had no reason to suspect otherwise. And yet, that look on V's face, her tone when she talked about seeing her grandmother drop dead. I was mentally exhausted but couldn't fall asleep. The strangeness that came upon my wife haunted me. The next day, I left for work early. When I came home, V was already home. She was sitting on the couch holding something in her hand. When she saw me, she smiled and held it up. It was a pregnancy test. It was positive. I stepped back. How was this possible? She had had a bicep. How the hell did she get pregnant? She smiled, a knowing yet cryptic that sent a chill down my spine. She approached me, and before I could say anything, she spoke. Darling, I know that we agreed not to have children, but I'm going to keep this baby. It's okay if you don't want to be involved. We'll get a divorce, and I'll get full custody. You don't have to pay child support. You'll be free from all responsibilities. She continued to smile at me, as if she was daring me to ask questions, to verbalize the math I was doing in my head, to give her a reason to get rid of me. I said nothing. I simply nodded and stumbled to my car. I spent the night in a hotel room. All of this somehow did and didn't make sense at the same time. That light that I saw was from a spacecraft. Somehow, when I had been blinded, my wife was replaced. The woman, the thing I saw next to me after it disappeared, was not my wife. It was one of them. So was that thing growing inside of her. It may share my DNA, but I felt no attachment to it, only fear. And what had they done with my wife? What had they done with my V? Was she even alive? And was this the beginning of an invasion? The divorce was hassle-free. The house was mine, and I kept it. As V and I had signed a prenup that ensured that she would keep what's hers and I would keep what's mine. And I don't think that thing that looks like my wife was interested in material possessions. I've been spending my time trying to get in touch with people who claim to have been abducted by aliens. I'm just grasping at straws here, hoping against hope to be able to see my wife again. I can't go to the police, as they would surely think that I'm insane. Soon after the divorce, I heard that the thing pretending to be Vashvir had quit her job and was moving to another city. I should feel some relief now that she's away from me, but I don't. For my own safety, I've decided to move away as well. You see, my neighbor, the same neighbor over whose house I saw the bright light, is pregnant. This would not be extraordinary, except she's in her late 40s. Interestingly, her husband died of a heart attack just a few days ago. As the police dragged him away, the madman screamed that his sacrifices were the only things that kept the beast contained. Well, I will certainly miss the easy meal. It will do me some good to finally stretch my wings again. The priests chanted religious verses as they thrusted their crucifixes at the beast. Their eyes widened in horror as it grinned and spoke the words, "I am not a servant of Satan. I was sent from above." 4 Facts About My Sister's Death by Threads in Needles. 1. Sometimes, in rare cases, identical twins can be separated from each other and live separate lives, never knowing the other exists. The twins may live in the same country, or even the same city, and just never happen to meet. With 8 billion people on Earth, strange things happen often. 2. Facial recognition software is becoming more and more accurate, and therefore more and more common. 3. Drones can be equipped with the software for various purposes. Drones can also be equipped with weaponry, such as missiles, in conjunction with this software to make them especially lethal. 4. Terrorists are often not given a trial and instead killed on sight. I laughed, running around and enjoying my new ability to stop time. My excitement turned to fear as I realized something was chasing me. Water by Prophetic Sea. Sarah frantically ran through the halls of the makeshift CDC building, trying to get out with her life. Her team had been called to some backwater town in Alabama to investigate the water, the locals complaining of it causing illness and being poisoned. Local health officials refused to touch the issue, citing some bull regulation that made it finally land on the desk of the CDC. Everything was normal at first. They had set up a temporary building and had begun testing for a few days when they began to notice strange things that had nothing to do with the water. Dead animals, ripped apart, would be found outside the compound. Strange sounds throughout the night, things that kept the team on edge, things that could not be explained. Then tonight, something crawled out of the water they had contained within the lab. It began attacking the team, a low guttural moan coming from the mouth. Tentacles covered in spines lashing out, embedding themselves in flesh that began to bleed. And the thing began to feed. Sarah was almost at freedom, almost out, when she saw the seal close around the containment door they used. The mayor of the town was latching it close, tightening it and sealing her in. She began to pound on the door, trying to get him to let her out. The mayor shook his head, sadly looking at her from the other side of the plexiglass. She understood now. They had never been here to fix anything. They were here to die, to keep the sacrifice going. She closed her eyes and began to pray as the guttural moans grew louder behind her. I'm usually not the type to get scared in graveyards, but I can't help but wonder why the coffins have locks. I found letters that my aunt had written to her deceased son by I Stan Catwoman. It was Saturday morning, around 9 o'clock, and I was still in bed, when I received a text message from my Aunt Marin. It was a request for me to come visit her as soon as possible. This was rather unexpected, as I hadn't heard from her in months. About 3 years earlier, my aunt and uncle had lost their only child. My cousin David was only 8 years old when he had drowned in a pond on their property that my aunt and uncle owned. It was a devastating blow to both of them. Sometime after David's death, they were divorced and my uncle moved away, but my aunt continued to live at their home. She hardly ever went out, and soon cut contact with all of her friends and most of her family. In fact, I was the only family member she had maintained contact with. However, over the last 6 months or so, she had stopped calling me and wouldn't respond to my calls and texts either. I texted her back asking if she was okay. I never received a reply. I had a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach and decided that I should go to see her. My aunt lived in another state and I had to drive for 6 hours to get to her residence. But for an aunt who had been nothing but kind to me when I was a child, this was something I was glad to do. I arrived at my Aunt Marin's sprawling estate in the late afternoon. Her once beautiful garden was in a state of disarray, with weeds growing all around. I entered the house and immediately a putrefied smell assailed my nostrils. It was the smell of dust, damp, and rot. Visually, the interior didn't fare very well either. There were cobwebs growing at every corner. The antique wooden furniture looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. The house-proud Marison that I knew would have been horrified at such conditions. I called out to her, telling her I was here. I was greeted only by the brooding silence that seemed to engulf the house. I looked for my aunt all over and found her in the study. She was sitting on her reading chair. She was perfectly still. I said her name as I approached her, and then placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. Confirmation of what I had feared came when I faced her. My beloved aunt was dead. Right in front of her on the table was a picture of my cousin, David. I was overcome with repentance for not visiting her sooner, for not checking up on her more often. I wiped the tears off my face and noticed that my aunt had something on her lap. On closer inspection, I saw that it was a small doll that looked eerily similar to her son. A chill ran down my spine when I saw it. Had she gotten involved in something strange? I suppose grief and living in a large home all alone could do a number on someone's mental stability. I called the emergency hotline. The paramedics confirmed that she was dead. I was questioned by the cops, and it was easy to confirm that I had just arrived in the city. I later found out that my aunt had consumed poison to take her own life. I figured that the pain of going on without her child was just too much, and she could bear it no longer. Before she died, she had made her will and had left the property, the house, and all its contents to me. I was staying at a hotel while I made arrangements for her funeral, called relatives, my uncle, etc. I could not bring myself to spend a night in that house. The atmosphere was just so heavy. I like to think of myself as a rational person, but I felt this anger, hateful gaze regarding me any time I went there. It made me feel like I wasn't welcome, and that it wanted me gone. A day before the funeral, I had to go to the house alone, as I needed to find a nice dress that my Aunt Marion owned. One that she could be buried in for her last repose. I was looking through her closet when a particularly elegant violet dress caught my eye. I imagined my aunt wearing it when out on a date with my uncle. How ravishing she must have looked in it. As I tried to take it out, it seemed to be caught on something. It was the door of a small compartment at the back of the closet. I put the dress on the bed, and after a moment's hesitation, I decided to look into the compartment. It was a small space and contained some old photos and a few papers. The pictures were of my aunt, my uncle, and my cousin. Some only had my aunt and uncle, while others had all three of them. I put them down and began to look at the papers. They were letters. From my aunt to David. The oldest one had been dated just 2 years ago, a year after David passed away, and the latest one had been written on the day my aunt died. I read the first one. My dear, sweet David, Mommy loved you. She really did. She never meant to cause you pain. I just couldn't do it anymore. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Being a mother is hard, David. I had to give up my whole life to raise you. Please, son, forgive me. What was this? What was my aunt apologizing for? Did she blame herself for David's demise? I read the next one. David, why don't you understand? It was difficult for me. I tried so hard to be a good mommy to you, but I only had you to make your father happy. I never wanted you. I couldn't do it anymore. David, won't you please just leave? Leave, David, please. For Christ's sake, leave. She never wanted him? I read a few more that were just like that one, my aunt just rambling on about how she never wanted a child and how sorry she is. Pieces of a horrible puzzle were coming together in my mind as I read each letter. Stop this, David. Stop frightening me. End this torment. Why don't you understand? It was hard for me to be a mother. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to hurt you. So I gave you a painless death. I just wanted your dad and I to go back to being happy, the way we were before you were born. David, you're a selfish child. You were always so selfish. You drove your father away from me. Even in life, you came between us, so I got rid of you. I had to. But your memory took him from me. David, you ruined my life. David, you evil child. And now you want to keep me here to torment me? Leave me alone, David. Just go. Leave David. The last letter my aunt wrote, the one she had written on that day she died, read, David, you vile, evil creature. I won't let you torment me anymore. I won't, David. I won't let you keep me here. You never loved Mommy, did you? After all I did for you, you selfish, evil creature. I'm going to escape, and I'll come for you now. Yes, David, Mommy is coming to punish you, you evil child. Mommy is coming, David. Mommy is coming for you. In this letter, my aunt had confessed to the murder of her son. Had it been the guilt that had driven her insane? Or was it something else? I couldn't just stand there and ponder over this too long. I heard, from a distance, what sounded like children's laughter. It was very faint, but was enough to send me scurrying to the safety of the outside world. I took the dress and the letters with me. I gave the dress to the funeral director and told no one about the letters. Yes, my Aunt Marian was a murderer. Yes, she had done a dastardly deed. But what good would exposing her do now? It would only serve to crush my uncle, who had finally moved on and had a new partner. I decided to burn them. Years have gone by since then. I still own the house that my aunt and uncle had lived in, where my cousin had breathed his last. It remains vacant. I just can't seem to sell it. I've tried to rent it out, but the tenants don't seem to last more than a few weeks. I guess David is still very angry. I received a note signed by my friend who died months ago in a car crash when I was driving. I noticed my hand fading away as I finished reading, "You need to believe that it happened to be on the other side." The Family Secret by P.A. Nightmares. Narrated by 242 with special guest P.A. Nightmares. They say that everyone who looks in the past of their family will inevitably find a secret sooner or later. However, I have such a boring family, and we live in an even less interesting small town residing in Ohio. So, around the age of 30, I started wondering more about my family, the history there, and where we originated from. I was not expecting what I found out. However, what I found out has caused me to never be able to feel safe around my family again. That is, if they can find me and bring me back, of course. Naturally, I started where anyone would, my grandparents and my parents. But I learned nothing. Well, nothing that I wouldn't have already known. So I did one of those ancestry tests to show me where my family came from. It was nothing shocking, mostly Irish and Scottish descent. This showed me something, but not much. So I did some research on the culture and religious beliefs of the area, and what I learned was very interesting. Where in Ireland and Scotland, the primary religions were Judaic ones, like Christianity and Catholicism. Before this, they worshipped a whole different version of gods, and I loved learning more and more about them. The information I learned was so interesting, I once again went to my parents. Mom, Dad, I have to talk to you. I've been doing endless research about our family. I have learned that even though it is currently Christianity that dominates in the region of our ancestors, It used to be pagan gods before the Romans came over. I went to continue, but before I could, my father, always being a little harsh, cut me off.
Old gods.
He stated coldly.
And I'm sure your next question is, do any of our family members still worship the old gods? The answer is yes, we still do, and would appreciate you not insulting them in our presence.
My father had always been a bit short-tempered when it came to religion. I never understood his dislike or anger about me getting baptized and becoming a Christian, but at that moment, I had an idea. So I looked him in the eyes and stated, "Dad, I'm sorry, I had no idea. I never meant any disrespect to you or your beliefs. I just want to know more about our past, beliefs, and practices. Would you be willing to tell me more about the ones you still carry out?" My dad waved a dismissive hand at me and calmly started talking about the specific deity him and my mother worshipped.
Fiona, look, first, I am sorry for my outburst. You've got to understand that our religious beliefs are considered cruel, and most don't take too kindly to them. Secondly, your mother and I worship the Celtic god Suucelis. He is the god of protection and provision. He is a god of agriculture, and every year we sacrifice a pig to him, as well as leaving an offering of lamb's blood, the finest liquors we can afford, along with the meat of the pig from the sacrifice. With that, he yields us a bountiful harvest, more than enough to feed us, and the excess to be sold to market, to pay whatever bills we may have for the year. Animal sacrifice has become a bit of a taboo subject, but it is still practiced in many cultures to this day.
That's so cool. Why didn't you guys tell me this sooner? I inquired to my father, kinda upset that he hid this part of my family history from me.
We did not tell you because by the time you were at an age to understand that this is not the kind of thing that you advertise to the public, you had already gone and got baptized. You chose your religious beliefs. We were not about to risk you choosing your faith over us. Gods forbid we would have to suffer another tragedy in the family.
Another tragedy? What do you mean another one? I practically shouted out in shock that they had hidden another major family event from me.
It happened well before you were born, and it's nothing you need concern yourself with. However, I would ask that you don't share this with any outsiders, because they will not understand. We have lived here all of our lives, and are comfortable here, my dear.
The way he said this to me, I don't know how to explain it. I felt fear and chills running down my spine. I excused myself, telling them that I was tired and just wanted to rest. Once I got up the stairs and to my room, I could still hear my mother and father arguing. I could not hear what they were saying at first, but once I cracked open my door, I could hear my mother crying and what she was saying. "She doesn't know anything, just let her go. She'll lose interest in more shortly. Everything she could find is long been wiped, and anyone other than us who knows is long dead. The only remaining proof is in your safe in our bedroom. So don't worry about it, alright, honey?"
Fine. If she stops asking questions, I'll forget about all of this.
I heard my father angrily stated. He loved me, and my safety has always been the utmost importance to him. But I just couldn't let this go. I waited for my father and mother to go to bed. After hours, I finally hear my parents walk up the stairs, along with footsteps walking towards my door. I was lying in my bed with the lights off and my back to the door. The door cracked open, hearing my father whisper my name. Not stirring, my father assumed I was asleep and shut the door. I waited for my parents' door to shut. Getting out of bed, I packed my bags. I was planning on getting into my parents' room and to their safe. After I achieved this, well, I was getting out of this house. I love my parents, but I just couldn't trust them anymore. So I packed my bags, hid them, and went back to bed. The next morning, I got up and went downstairs. My mother and father was sitting at the table eating breakfast. "Good morning. Before you say anything, I just wanted to say I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't mean to pry or upset you. I'm done digging into this. I love you both, and I don't want to upset you or bring up hurtful memories. I hope you guys can forgive me. I said all this in hopes of placating my father's suspicion and making it easier for me to get into the room. I had to wait to act, so I sat at the table as my mom put a plate down for me. After a few weeks of waiting patiently, I finally got the opportunity I had been waiting for. My parents told me they needed to take a trip to the market. They asked me to accompany them, and I declined, saying I didn't feel well and just wanted to rest. I walked them to the door as they left. My mother stopped at the door and looked at me. I was worried for a moment, but she told me that when she got back, she'd make me a nice cup of chicken noodle soup. I thanked her and told them I loved them before closing the door behind them. I watched their car drive away, waving at them in the window with a smile. The second they were out of sight, I headed for that safe. I had no idea where the safe was, but my father was predictable. I found the safe behind our family portrait. I took down our smiling faces, looking at the keypad. I tried my birthday first, and it worked. I opened my bag and put all the papers inside of it, putting everything else back how I found it. I grabbed my stash bags and left the house. I threw the bags into the back seat of my car before driving off. I drove for hours, having to fill my car multiple times. I used cash, of course. I did not want my parents to be able to track me. I found a hotel and asked for a room that looked out to the parking lot, just in case. When I got into the room, I threw the bags onto the bed, thinking about a shower or reading the papers. I decided the shower would be there. I needed to see what my parents had hidden from me all these years. At first, it was normal stuff, passports, birth certificates, etc. Things you would normally want to keep safe. However, one of the documents stood out. It was a missing persons report for a little boy. His name was James O'Brien. Wait, that's my last name, I said out loud in my confusion. I read the report. My parents were listed as his. He was an 8-year-old and had gone missing in the woods near my house. The report was from before I was even born. I looked through the papers and found some newspaper clippings all about my brother. The last one said that my brother had not been found and presumed dead. I put the papers down. They never found my brother. Given the fact that my parents went to all this effort to hide this from me, I have to assume they played a part in it. I shook my head, having trouble staying awake. I had to do something before I succumbed to exhaustion. I grabbed my laptop, putting together everything I could, everything I knew about my missing brother. Emailed myself photos of the papers. My parents had always told me not to play by the big tree near the house, how I had been yelled at for digging at it once. So maybe that's where his body was. I put it all in a document and created a program. If I didn't put a password in after every 4 hours, it would send everything to the cops. I did this to keep myself safe. Who knows if I'd go missing next. Before I fell asleep, I set an alarm so I would put the code in. I laid down and turned off the lights. The next thing I remembered is the alarm going off. I went to turn my light on, but my blood ran cold. I had left my blinds open just enough to see my car and the spots next to it. Next to my car was my parents. The clerk must have ran my credit card instead of holding it. I put the code into the computer before throwing everything into a bag. I rushed to the door and flung it open to find my parents already on the other side. Before I could say a word, they pushed me back inside and closed the door. My father spoke to me in a warm, yet authoritative tone.
Look, let us explain. I know what you found, and it looks bad, I'll admit. Hear me out.
I looked at my father, letting him go on. There was no way past him anyway.
We had a particularly harsh winter, and lost all of our livestock. We did not have a sacrifice for Suucelis, and if we did not do something, we all would have died, so I did the hardest thing I would ever have to do. And we used my son, your brother, as the sacrifice that year. I'll never forgive myself.
My father looked me dead in the eyes. I didn't see my loving father. I saw a monster.
But if you turn us in, I'll lose a daughter as well.
My father ended it with so much venom, I jumped back in shock. How could you? I cried out. How? No! I took a deep breath. If you harm me, my laptop is programmed to send all the information to the police. So you leave me alone, and this will never come to light. I opened my bag and took my laptop out and handed him all the files. He took the bag and left with my mother. It's been years since I spoke to them. I typed this up because this morning I noticed a strange vehicle outside my house. So if you're reading this, I'm probably with my older brother. So please, stay out of Ohio. After an eventful day of moving, I smiled as I brushed a stray hair from your sleeping face, thinking of our future in this new house and the family we will one day fill it with. Sure, the basement isn't as big and your chains are a little shorter, but this time I made sure to find somewhere no one will ever look. My friend was odd. I had a friend in high school named Jack. He was always very odd, even for a teenager. I remember him being so interested in pimples, of all things. If you had one on your face, he had to pop it. No matter what you did, he'd be all over you to pop it. We all just put up with it. He was really a nice guy besides this, so we just let him pop our zits and go back to what we were doing. It was our last month of our final year in high school. We were talking over lunch about what we were wearing for prom and all of that when Jack walked up. He stopped dead and just stared at me. I knew this look too well. I had a zit and he wanted to pop it. Please, not today, Jack, I said.
But it'll only take a second,
he responded as he moved closer to me. No, really, ouch! I screamed and slapped his hand away. He had reached out to touch my zit, and it hurt. A lot just to be touched. I don't know how I hadn't realized it was there till this moment. It was a bad one, and it would have to wait.
Oh, I really should pop it if it hurts that much.
His voice seemed a bit off. No, Jack, stop. You only touched it and it hurt that much. Just wait till tomorrow, I said, putting my hand between the zit and his eyes. Jack pressed his lips and tried to reach out again, but I got out of my chair. He just wouldn't look away from me, his eyes fixed on the zit that my hand hid. You know what? Forget this. I grabbed my things and left the lunch area. Jack went to follow me, so I hid into the girls' bathroom. I knew he wouldn't follow me in there. I looked in the mirror, and on my chin was a very red blemish. I touched it, and the pain was intense. This one was bad, the worst I have ever had. I stayed in the bathroom, texting with my friends, and asking another girl when she entered if Jack was still out there. He was. So I spent my whole lunch in the bathroom. Once the bell rang, I waited till I was already late before leaving. Jack was gone, but the way he acted was so odd. I got in trouble with my teacher, but I told them I ate something that didn't agree with me. Since it wasn't normal for me to be late, the teacher let it slide. I also didn't have any classes with Jack, so I just beelined it to all the classes the rest of the day to stay away from him. My parents were away for the weekend, some kind of business thing, so I was home alone. I made myself something to eat, watched YouTube before heading to bed. I hadn't been feeling great all week, so I just wanted to rest and see if that would help. In the middle of the night, I woke up hearing my front door open. I had always been a light sleeper. I heard soft footsteps downstairs. They moved the stairs and headed up them. I won't lie, it took me longer than it should have to figure out that this was bad. I've never been into scary movies or anything. As the footsteps moved up the stairs, I got on my bed silently and looked around my room. I didn't have anything that I could use as a weapon, so I grabbed my phone off the stand and got into the closet, shutting it just before my door opened. I really couldn't see much through the slats in the middle of the door. The person huffed as they entered my room. I could hear them looking around and stopped at my bed. I could just see a figure in all black. They moved around my bed, looking around, careful not to step on anything. I lost sight of them as they headed to my door. I held my phone close to my chest, but my phone started to ring. I had to turn it off, but before I did, I saw Jack's name show up on my screen. Damn him for calling me at this time. My closet door opened and the man grabbed me and pushed me to the desk chair. I tried to get up, but they punched me in the stomach, knocking the wind right out of me. All the fight in me gone for that instant as they put the handcuffs on my hands behind the chair and then some on my legs. When I tried to move again, they just punched me in the stomach once more and used rope to bring the two cuffs together so that there was no way I could move or get away. I called the cops. They're on their way. I yelled as best I could the figure, a man I guessed at this point.
No, you didn't,
they said back, with a voice I knew. They took their mask off, and you guessed it, it was Jack. Jack stood there, an odd smile on his face, like a kid getting something they had asked for months.
Plus, if you had, it won't stop me.
He moved closer to me. What the hell, Jack? I tried to move back, but the clothes around the chair stopped me from rolling, and I really couldn't do much.
Just hold still. This will be over very soon.
He reached out to my face and touched my zit. The pain was so intense. Was he really here because I wouldn't let him pop my zit? He started to push on it, and I screamed in pain. After a few seconds, the pain faded as my zit popped. He let out a sigh of relief as it popped.
That's better. Now your beautiful face isn't ruined by such a terrible zit,
he said with a smile. Will you let me go now? Jack's face twitched for a moment.
Why would I do that? I finally can have you to myself.
Before I could say anything, he put a rag over my face. All I remember before I passed out was him saying,
I finally have you, and I'll make sure your face is always perfect.
This story was written by me, 242. What's it like being dead? The little girl asked me. I held her hand, looked her in the eyes, and spelled out, cold and lonely, on the Ouija board. Dating by Prosthetic C. It was her smile that initially got my attention. I know that sounds cliche and all, but her smile really did get my attention more than anything. I mean, she had amazing tits and an ass that wouldn't quit, but when she smiled, it kinda took my breath away. We started off slow, getting to know each other. I was nervous, I won't lie. Everyone before her had taken a part of me that I didn't think I would get back. I thought love was just a myth. We got progressively more and more serious, eventually moving in together, and I was still amazed at how much her smile could light up a room. I woke up every day to see her sleeping next to me, a tiny grin on her peaceful face. I remember as the months went by, I started to see her smile less and less. I remember the day her smile was gone completely, when she found the hidden drawer in my filing cabinet, when she saw all the parts of the women I took who hurt me. Vivian's bright blue eyes, Sasha's red hair, Ashley's cute upturned nose. She didn't understand that those women had hurt me, and I had to take from them to make it equal. She lost her smile, but luckily, I kept her jaw and lips and teeth as part of my collection. Now I see her smile whenever I want. The angel said, "And he will be the Son of God." She tried to protest, but his voice grew foreboding. "Mary, I will not take no for an answer." I Don't Think My Wife is Asleep by Falling from the Sky 31. 2:49 a.m. I lay awake in bed, lying on my right side. My wife is behind me. She's awake, I can tell. I can feel her staring at me from behind. She's always been a night owl, but tonight feels different. She feels wrong. She's breathing heavy, and I should check on her, but for the life of me, I can't bring myself to turn around. 3:03 a.m. I can feel her moving close. She moves ever so slightly, and I can feel her touch my back of my hair. Is she caressing me? The hairs on my neck are standing up. Why is her hand so cold? I can see the door to my room through the darkness. My entire body just wants to jump up and run to it. I can't do that. I'm being silly. 3:13 a.m. She's right behind me. I can smell her breath. It's horrible. I've never smelled her like this before. I can feel something pressed into my back. Is it a knife? It doesn't feel sharp. I gotta do something. I decide to jump up and turn the lights on, but right before I do, the hall light turns on, and I can hear my wife coming up the stairs. She's on the phone with her mom. I can hear her crying. Apparently, her grandpa died earlier today. He never liked me. Maybe that's why he decided to pay me a visit tonight. The woman came running out of the dark alley and whispered in a scared voice, "Pretend that you know me." As I embraced her, I nodded to the silhouette of my brother in the shadow of the alley. I Think I'm Trapped in a Hallmark Movie by Blair Daniels. I first noticed it in the kitchen. My sister was putting the final touches on a batch of Christmas cookies. Turning to get more icing, she bumped the plate with her hip and it flew onto the ground. "Oh, gosh darn it!" What? Gosh darn it? I chuckled. "Who are you, and what have you done with my sister?" Brittany stared at me blankly. "Look, I know my sister. She swears like a 50-year-old sailor drunk on cheap beer. Ruining an hour's worth of cookie making should have at least elected a fuck." But it didn't. "Ah, I see. This is an act for Jonathan," I winked at her. "Don't worry, I won't tell." "What are you talking about?" she asked. I bent down and picked up a shattered piece of cookie. You know, your constant swearing, your secret's safe with me. I reached for another piece of cookie, picked it up, and threw it towards the garbage. Instead of falling in, it ricocheted off the edge. Ah, fuck. I froze. At the exact moment I said fuck, a car horn had blared outside, drowning it out completely. I frowned. Fuck. Fuck. What the fuck is going on here? I stared at Brittany, eyes wide. She ignored my question. "We have to bake more cookies," she continued as if I hadn't said anything. "If the Christmas celebration tonight doesn't impress Christopher, he's going to shut down the community center forever." The community center? When have you ever given a fuck about the community center? Since I started Wolfies? What? You know, my business, baking dog Christmas cookies. I frowned. These cookies are for dogs? She nodded. Okay, look. What's gotten into you? I stood up, brushing the crumbs off my hands. You don't even like dogs. You say they make too much noise and poop everywhere. You don't even like animals, period, or kids. That reminds me, Christopher's nephew is going to be at the celebration. He's an orphan and he loves dogs too. I think I'm going to surprise him with a puppy from the shelter. I stared at her. What? It's going to be so awesome. Don't you love Christmas? I threw my hands up. You're acting really weird right now. I'm going to, go rest for a while, okay? She nodded, eyes widened, and perky smile on her face. That's when I noticed something else. She wasn't wearing her usual outfit of black tank top and skin-tight jeans. Instead, she was wearing a bright red sweater and a neat skirt. Her hair, which was usually tied up in a messy bun, fell in a perfect loose wave around her face. You're dressed weird, I muttered. She just smiled back at me. I trudged out of the kitchen, through the family room, and I was about to climb the stairs when I stopped. Something's different. Well, for one, my mom's house was clean, which was super weird. Because she's a borderline hoarder who keeps everything from 20-year-old Christmas cards to free pens. The clutter was gone, a fire was going in the fireplace, and a fluffy red throw sat across the sofa. Weird. But there was something else. My gaze caught on the mantel above the fireplace. Even from a distance, I could tell the photos were different. I'd seen the photos there a million times. The dorky photo of me in braces I hated. The photo of the four of us and our cat. They were burned into my brain. Not one of the familiar photos remained. I stepped closer, studying the photos. A girl with braces playing outside, a mother and father sitting on a sofa, 2 toddlers between them, 2 girls holding hands while sitting on a swing. My heart dropped, every muscle in my body paralyzed. They weren't us. They looked like stock photos of a family that very roughly, resembled ours. I ran up the stairs, my head spinning, my throat dry. What's going on here? Nothing made sense. Not the way Brittany was acting, not the way she was dressed, not my mom's house, not our photos. It all clashed in my brain so wrong. I collapsed into the bed of my childhood room, the only thing that felt familiar in this house. My stuff had been boxed up long ago, but the walls were still the shade of lavender I picked out in middle school. The bedspread was still deep purple, the mattress was still soft as a feather. I laid there in silence. Funny how, now that there was no random car horns or a flock of Canadian geese, I was almost drifting off to sleep when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Brittany? I called. But they sounded louder, heavier, like a man's footsteps. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. Our father had passed away several years ago. Christmas dinner wasn't for a few days. Too early for our uncles to be here. I backed away, heart drumming in my chest. Hello? I called out. The footsteps paused. Who's there? I shouted. The footsteps resumed, closer now, so close that they were right outside the door. Brittany! I shouted, hoping she could hear me. Brittany, there's someone! The door opened. My voice died in my throat. A man stood there, a naked man with only a small towel wrapped around his waist. He stared at me with dark, hungry eyes. Then he smiled. "Hey, honey, are you okay?" I screamed. "Honey, what's wrong?" The man was rushing towards me. I ducked underneath his still outstretched arms and ran to the door. Down the stairs and out the front door. I heard Brittany shouting behind me, but I didn't listen. I kept running and running. In a few blocks, I reached town, but it wasn't our town. It was this cutesy little town that time has forgotten, with shops lining the sidewalks and tinsel strung up between the street lamps. Gone were the liquor stores and rowdy teenagers and an endless supply of litter. And yes, there was even a community center, but not our community center of stained cement and smashed beer bottles in the parking lot. No, it was now a darling brick building, a Christmas candle burning in each window. No, this can't be. What the fuck is happening? I hurried forward as I walked. Snowflakes began to fall from the gray sky. A few landed on my bare arm. They didn't melt. "Hey!" I cried out to the nearest person, a woman waiting to cross the street with perfectly wavy hair and bright red peacoat. "Hey, can you help me?" She turned towards me, a smile plastered on her face. "Of course. What do you need?" "I don't think I belong here. This isn't my town. It's..." I faltered. Her grin had faded. She now stared at me, face set in stone, eyes burning with hatred. Then she took a step towards me. I ran. And that brings us here. I've been hiding out behind a perfectly decorated Christmas tree in someone's yard. Don't worry, the house isn't actually occupied, despite all the cute lights and candy canes. I looked in the window. The house is completely empty on the inside. So I'm safe. For now. But I don't think it'll be long. There's a ring on my left finger, probably belonging to the man back at my parents' house. He'll probably call the police around here and tell them I'm missing, that I seem mentally unstable, that I should be apprehended immediately. At least the internet seems to work, but calling Brittany's number and my mom's has only resulted in static. All I can do now is ask for your help. If you turn on your TV and see a Christmas movie featuring a short girl with a mole on her right cheek and an AC/DC t-shirt, that's me. Help me, please. Help me leave this place before it's too late. My father really loved using his fancy Fitbit watch and wanted to be buried with it. Days after the funeral, I logged into his account to end service and saw a spike of activity the night he was buried. Wake Up by 242. "Wake up," said a sharp voice. I jumped out of bed. What had I been dreaming? I thought to myself. Before me stood a woman with a coat tied around her, her pale blue eyes looking at me. Did I know her? "Are you awake, Emily? For real this time?" The woman moved closer to me and waved a hand in front of my face. "Yes, I'm awake," I said. Why had that hurt? "Oh, good. Can you tell me what my name is?" I was about to say no, but then Jane came to my mind. "Jane?" I said weakly, my voice just sounding so off. "Good, they haven't taken your mind," she said as she walked over to the coat rack, taking off a coat that seemed just right for me. "They?" I asked. "What's going on here?" "Jane, I was just sleeping." She shook her head. "No, what you see is left from their effects. You're in a lab being experimented on. We need to get you out of here."
The bedroom that I had been looking at changed before my eyes. It became brighter, and I could hear beeps of machines. I turned back at my bed to see a hospital bed. How was this possible? I took the coat from Jane and put it on. How is this? We don't have time, Jane cut me off. Emily, we need to go now. She moved to the door and opened it. She stuck her head out and looked each way. It's clear. We gotta go. She stepped out of the room. I quickly followed her. The second my head hit the door, everything went black. Jane caught Emily as she fell forward, being knocked out by the implant. It worked, Doctor, Emily said without looking up, her voice now colder than it had been before. She is taking less time into following and remembering my new name. Should we reset? A voice came through the speaker in the room. It was a rough male voice. Yes, please do. Let's see how many times we can reset her mind. Jane nodded and dragged Emily back into the bed, putting everything back and sticking a needle in Emily's arm. Wake up, said a sharp voice. I jumped out of bed. What had I been dreaming? I thought to myself. There was a piece of chalk left by the blackboard in the abandoned schoolhouse we were exploring, so I jokingly wrote, "Get out," for the next people who came along to find. I shone my flashlight around the otherwise empty room to see the graffiti-covered walls, but when I settled back on the blackboard, the words, "No you," along with the chalky handprints, were now underneath what I wrote. The Wow Planet by NinjaGal15. August 15th, 1977. Ohio State University received a signal from Sagittarius constellation. It was an unknown origins, but believed by some to be a sign of extraterrestrial life. Nobody knows that we sent a crew out there in 1985. There are 32 stars with planets within the constellation, and the closer they got, the easier it was to narrow down possible origins. The crew found the signal originated from a core of one exoplanet, which they dubbed the Wow Planet. All of them heard strange noises, but they heard it together, all but one. One of the crewmen, Simon, went insane. He claimed to hear a song calling for him, singing sweet rhymes into his ear. The crew eventually had to tie him down after he attacked some of them, resulting in one casualty. Seeing Simon was past help, the crew finally agreed to let him go to the crater, as long as he took a video cam with him and transmitted the signal back to them. He agreed, practically panting at the prospect of finding his precious song. Simon ran as fast as the stronger gravity would allow, diving into the crater as if he wouldn't get hurt from the fall. The crew watched the live transmission, assuming Simon would simply fall and die. Sad as that would be, they did want to see him pay in some way for the death of their crewmate, and they definitely didn't want to spend a journey back home sleeping near him. He landed deep underground, screaming about how he could hear the planet sing. He crawled through the caves and tunnels, which were full of strange, viscous slime. The walls seemed to pulsate around him, but the crew wasn't sure if it was just interference or not.
Finally, he reached a large cistern, and back in their ship, the crew began to shudder. In the center of the cistern was a large, glowing void. It was hard to look at, even through a video camera, as if it couldn't decide what shape it was. It fluctuated from being pea-sized to truck-sized and was wiggling around like a bug. All around it were unknown alien creatures. Some of them were bipeds, others had many colored scales. A few had multiple heads, and one was even made of vines. All of the aliens were emitting a sound similar to the wow signal, and Simon began to sing along with it, matching the frequency exactly. The void in the center grew in size, and for a moment the crew thought they saw Simon's face inside of it, screaming alongside the other alien creatures. The camera dropped to the ground, but before it cut out, Simon looked right at it, grinning menacingly and singing the wow frequency, and began to cry. The crew returned home and, sworn to secrecy, tried to return to normal life in NASA, studying other anomalies, putting aside both the weird creature and the confirmation of extraterrestrial life. It wasn't easy, but they did their best. Yesterday, I was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. I don't have long left, even less time, since I'm skipping treatment. The very last thing I want to do is tell the truth. I was one of the researchers who received the footage from Earth when they returned. Every night when I close my eyes, I see the aliens singing. I hear the wow frequency inside my head. I see the crewmate Simon screaming and singing at the same time, as if living an eternity of pain and ecstasy. I know this for sure. We aren't alone in the universe. But I don't think we'll be investigating any more space signals. Ever wondered why so few people have a sixth sense? It's called natural selection, 'cause the moment you can sense them, they can sense you. Memories by As the Raven Dreams. What's the old adage? Never work with children or animals? He hovered over me and chuckled. En contraire, my friend, working with children nets the best results. But animals are easier to get nowadays. His face twisted into a malicious grin. Then there are people like you that make my life even easier. Not only are you in plentiful supply, the world doesn't question the ethics of what I'm doing. What exactly are you doing? A suit in the corner with his arms crossed was clearly not as amused with this whole scenario. The intention of this experiment is to remove the subject's memories so that only the most painful exist, the doctor continued, hovering over me. This subject is in prison for murdering his own daughter. Quite a sickening act, even for the worst individuals. I didn't murder her, I mumbled my words in a low tone. That's what you keep saying, yet here you are. The doctor grinned again. Regardless of our friend's lies, you will be witnessing the next step in criminal rehabilitation. Currently, we throw these evil individuals in a 10 by 10 cell and call it a day. In the near future, and today, we will instead implant tremendous mental and emotional pain into the subject for a short amount of time in order to show them the errors of their actions. And how does this fix the prisoner? Another suit asked his question. It's not dissimilar to the pain compliance that you used when arresting a subject. The doctor looked up at them. Except by triggering their emotional pain, we can almost rewrite the evil out of their brain, and do so within hours or days, not decades. Please don't, I begged in a whispered tone. I'm sorry, sir. You were chosen to be the first subject. The doctor smirked down at me. And the first subject you shall be. He connected a device over my scalp and plugged various wires into each other. Now, there will be a slight sting. Once the connection is made, you won't feel anything, and your vision will go dark. This is completely normal, and you shouldn't worry about it. Within a moment or two, the machine will get to work, digging into those memories and deciding, via a very complex algorithm, which one will do the trick. Then, that memory will be played in your head on repeat until the rehabilitation is complete. As he finished the explanation, I could feel a slight pain in my head. And how do you know when it's finished? One of the men in the room asked the doctor. The machine will decide. He reached over and grabbed his jacket. Until then, let's get lunch, gentlemen. I could faintly hear their feet scuffling as the room faded to black. Within seconds, I was back home, standing outside my front door. I could feel my heart racing as I reached out and opened my front door to find my daughter lying dead on the floor. Shooting up a school is effing stupid. It requires way too much effort, causes a lot of chaos, and there's no way of getting away with it. Sitting in the cafeteria watching my schoolmates drop like flies, I took pride in knowing my method of poisoning the pizza was so much more efficient. Beautiful Monster by 242. The day I met her was nothing special, or so it started that way. I had gone over to a friend's house for a little get-together. It was just a few friends to hang out and talk. Since I had locked myself in my house for the last few weeks, it is nice to get out for a little. Amber had broken my heart, and I just needed to get over her. Then she walked into the room. Her name was Vivian, and she looked how I always imagined the goddess Aphrodite to. She had on a tight red dress that looked like it was made only for her, hugging each curve in just the right way. Her light brown hair framing her face to show off her bright gray eyes. They held an intense look to them. She had legs that just didn't seem to have an end to them. I knew the moment her eyes locked on me, I would ask her out. After a bit of time, I walked up to this beauty, Vivian. It took me a little time to get into the groove of talking to her, but soon she was smiling and laughing. Her voice and laugh were music to my ears. How was someone like this even able to be real? I asked myself. It took me a bit of time, but I asked her out to dinner, and she said yes. I took her to my favorite restaurant. It might look like a hole-in-wall, and at first she didn't seem to be sure. Once she tasted the food, she understood why I picked this place. The food was always so good, and though it looked run down, it was well taken care of. We talked, and I learned she was a lawyer. A goddess like her could truly make anyone agree with her, I thought. We headed into a park after dinner to talk. I put my hand on her hip, and she didn't stop me, a soft smile on her face as she looked at me. "Kiss me," she commanded, and I did as she told me. The kiss was like nothing before. It was like fireworks going off in my head. I felt nothing like this before. After what felt like a lifetime, she pulled her lips from mine, telling me it was time to head home. I shook my head, but nodded. A few weeks passed by. I had gone to her home a few times, but we had only made out. I was growing more impatient each day. How could she keep pushing me away? How could she not desire me as much as I did her? So I decided one night I finally just sneak into her house and show her how much I needed her. Last time I was over, I had unlocked a window in the basement and used it to get in. She had said she never really went down there. It was dark down here, but there was enough so I could see. I stopped dead when I heard footsteps above me. But it wasn't her soft ones. It was heavier. Was she cheating on me? Was she with another man before me? I felt my vision go red as I walked into a bookcase. A book fell off and hit the ground. "Shit," I said quietly as I went to pick it up. Upstairs, no one seemed to move towards the door that led downstairs. I let out a breath and moved to the book to pick it up. I had to stay calm if I was going to show her. The book had opened and spilled its contents. Photos had fallen out, all over the ground. They were of different men, all with their throats slashed and hanging over the bed. She stood there smiling her beautiful smile with blood all over her face. I put the photos away into the book and looked at it. I knew what I needed to do. I headed upstairs, the book in my hand. I headed to her bedroom, a man naked and tied to her bed. She had left her door open, not expecting me. I pulled out my own knife. I needed to do something. Vivian hadn't noticed me at all. She was bent over, grabbing something, probably a bowl for the man's blood. He was blindfolded, so he couldn't see anything. "Vivian," I said with a strength I didn't know I had. She looked at me with those eyes. I held out the book. "I know what you're about to do." "You do you?" she said, pulling the bowl up, her voice soft. "Planning to stop me?" I moved closer to the man who was now pulling on his restraints. I moved my knife closer to him. "No, Vivian, I desire to help you." With that, I slit his throat. She moved the bowl under the cut to collect his blood. I looked at her and smiled. I saw her smile, a true, warm smile, as the blood drained from our sacrifice. I had found another demigod who understood blood kept us looking young and beautiful forever. Amber hadn't tasted as good as this man did. What has 2 thumbs and might be a psychopath? The man asked sarcastically. The last person you'll ever see, he answered, plunging his 2 thumbs deep into the eye sockets of his screaming victim. I could hear the man's footsteps as he followed me home from work. So, after I took the knife from my purse, I slowed down and let him catch up. My sister's baby has been talking to me by I Stan Catwoman. When my sister Jillian announced her 2nd pregnancy, I was so happy for her and my brother-in-law. She and her husband Matt already had a 3-year-old son, Jared, who I love to spoil. I was so excited to be an aunt for the 2nd time. Unfortunately, when my sister was in her 7 months of her pregnancy, the world was ravaged by the pandemic, and life seemed to have come to a standstill. Shortly afterwards, Matt was laid off from his job. Jillian worked from home, but her income wasn't nearly enough to pay rent on their 2-bedroom flat. I couldn't bear the thought of my dear sister and her family struggling. I own a 3-bedroom house and invited them to stay with me until the pandemic warned and Matt found a new job. They agreed and soon moved in with me. My sister and brother-in-law took one of the spare bedrooms. My nephew took the other. The new baby would sleep in Jillian's and Matt's room. My dog Nova, a German Shepherd Rottweiler mix, has always been very gentle with Jared. Every time they came over, they had a blast playing together. Under supervision, of course. I often jokingly call Jared Nova's tiny Homan. I was looking forward to how she would react to an even tinier human. 2 months later, Jillian gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Matt was over the moon, and Jared seemed to be excited to have a little sister. I didn't go to the hospital due to the restrictions, and instead got everything that my sister would need ready at home. As soon as their car pulled into the driveway in the early afternoon, Nova tucked her tail between her legs and whined. This was something I had never seen her do. I wanted to comfort her and take care of whatever was bothering her, but I had to go help my sister out of the car while my brother-in-law got the car seat out. Nova ran off into my bedroom and stayed there. Until we had entered the house, I hadn't gotten a good look at my niece. When everything had settled down, I decided to greet the newest addition to the family, Akira. I looked at her little face, ready to introduce myself as her aunt, but something stopped. Akira's glance held an eerie intelligence, a strange sort of awareness, one that didn't seem to fit the contrast of a newborn infant. Her blue eyes seemed to regard me as if she was sizing me up, trying to see if I would be a problem for her. Matt noticed my discomfort and jokingly said, "I didn't know you were that scared of babies." I made an effort to smile and set aside my discomfort. I tickled Akira's little feet and welcomed her to the world. I told myself I was just tired and seeing things. We got Akira into her crib and Jillian settled in to get some sleep. Matt and Jared were playing in the living room, and I went to fill up the water bottle Jillian kept by the bedside. As I was about to exit the room, I heard a female voice say, "Finger!" The voice sounded childlike, but I jumped to the obvious conclusion that it came from my sister. Who else would have said it? I went close to Jillian and asked if she needed anything, but she was asleep. Then I heard it again. Finger! Finger! I froze when I realized it came from the crib. I looked in and baby Kira looked me in the eyes and said once again, Finger! I just stood there. It was as if my brain could not process what it had seen and heard. I stumbled out of the room. I went downstairs and asked Matt if it was normal for newborn babies to talk. He looked at me like I had two heads and asked, What? I realized how ridiculous that question sounded and just replied, Oh, nothing. The baby monitor hadn't been installed yet, and he obviously didn't hear the baby talk. I should mention that the entire time, Nova refused to leave my room. She stayed near the bed with her ears perked up. Since the day Akira entered my house, Nova only left the room to go outside. She would do her business and then rush upstairs to the safety of my bedroom. The next morning, we were all sitting at the breakfast table. And of course, the baby was there too. I was slicing up some more apples when the larger butcher knife I kept in a knife case fell on my finger. Let me rephrase that. The knife seemed to jump out of the case and the sharp edge landed on my finger. It caused a large and deep cut, and in seconds the cutting board and the apple slices were painted crimson. Jillian and Matt rushed to check on me. Jillian asked why on earth I was using such a big butcher's knife to cut apples. I wanted to tell her that this inanimate cutting instrument had pretty much attacked me, but I bit my tongue as I had started to question my own sanity. But then, as Matt was bandaging my finger, I looked at Akira. I didn't know it was possible for a baby to look evil, but that's exactly how Akira looked. And I don't mean, F you, I'm going to start crying at 3 a.m. kind of evil. This was a look of, which I'm just getting started. For the next few days, life went on as normal. I tried to explain away the incidents that had occurred just days prior. Akira really hadn't said anything. My tired brain was just playing tricks on me. The butcher's knife hadn't been properly placed in the case, so it fell on my hand. The baby hadn't given me any kind of look. It was probably just babies making a weird face. Babies make weird faces all the time. And Nova was probably just sick or something. I spoke to her vet and he agreed to let me bring her to his house for a quick checkup. As we drove to the vet's house, the old Nova seemed to have returned. She thoroughly enjoyed the drive as she always did. She looked out the window as her ears blew in the wind and pawed at my hand asking for pets. The vet examined her and told me nothing seemed to be wrong. He asked me about her food intake and bowel movements and told me that too didn't show a sign of illness. On the drive back, Nova was her playful self until we got to the front door. She seemed reluctant to go in. I had to pull her inside by her leash. Jillian greeted me and asked me if Nova was okay. I told her she was fine, even as Nova rushed upstairs. Matt was in the kitchen making dinner. Jillian and Jared were playing on the living room floor as Akira was in her bassinet, grumbling like any other baby. I felt guilty for having those awful thoughts about her. Jillian's phone rang and she went to answer it. I decided to play with the baby. I touched her little cheeks when she suddenly said, "Chest!" I withdrew my hand immediately in fear. She once again gave me that evil smile. I looked at Jared to see if he had heard it, but he seemed lost in his own make-believe world. Jillian was coming back into the living room when the chest of the drawers in the hallway that were leaning against the wall fell over. From my point of view, it looked like it was pulled down by an invisible force. The chest was heavy and sturdy, and there was no explanation for the toppling over like that. Thankfully, it missed her, but only by a few inches. Matt ran into the hallway to check on Jillian as I did. Even Jared was pulled out of his childish fantasy. We asked Jillian if she was okay, and Matt asked how the chest had fallen. As we picked up the chest and the items that had fallen out, Akira's chest replayed in my mind over and over again. Jillian went back to playing with Jared, and Matt went to the kitchen. When I looked into the bassinet again, Akira was grinning from ear to ear. The grin was one that I'm sure was impossible for a baby to produce, but there it was. I decided to take a leaf out of my dog's playbook and keep my distance from Akira. I would avoid going near her. When Matt and Jillian played with her, I would only smile from a safe distance, or I would simply interact with Jared instead. I tried to disguise my aversion, but my sister still noticed. One evening, she asked me point blank why I had been so distant from her daughter. I tried to come up with some BS excuse, but she was clearly hurt by my behavior. She said, "I just thought you should interact with her while she was staying here. Who knows when we'll get to spend so much time together once Matt gets another job and the lockdown is lifted." I accepted defeat and promised her I would make more of an effort to spend time with Akira. I felt something rise in the pit of my stomach, even as the words came out of my mouth. The next morning, after breakfast, I decided to fulfill my promise. I cooed over Akira and tickled her tiny feet, even as my fingers trembled. I tried to keep a smile on my face and play the loving act. Jillian looked pleased at this. I was baby talking to Akira as Jillian exited the kitchen to go talk to her husband. As soon as she was out of earshot, Akira spoke. She uttered an almost adult sounding, "You think you're funny?" I recoiled. I decided to speak to this creature and ask her what in heck she wanted. Akira just smiled, the same cryptic smile. Then she blurted out, "Screw! Screw! Screw!" She said over and over while cocking her head from side to side in a singular, unsettling fashion. I stood up and decided to go get Jillian. I had just had dialogue with what was supposed to be a newborn baby. I needed to lie down. That night, I sat in bed with Nova at my side. I searched the internet for symptoms of mental illness that might be causing me to see and hear things. Well, on another tab, I was searching for unusual behaviors from babies. On yet another tab, I was looking for myths and legends about evil babies. At this point, I honestly was losing my mind. But it turned out that I would not have to wonder whether I was going crazy or not for too long. At around 2 in the morning, I heard shuffling noises from downstairs. I wondered if it was a burglar. I quietly went downstairs, wielding a sledgehammer in one hand and a can of pepper spray in the other. What I saw was scarier than any intruder could ever be. It was the baby. My sister's barely a month-old baby. She was crawling on the wall from the living room to Jillian and Matt's room. She looked like some kind of fleshy spider. She certainly moved with the speed of one. The thing crawled back into the room without making a sound. I stood there. I couldn't feel my hands and feet and felt dizzy after what I had seen. I collapsed right there on the staircase. I sat there for a while before it struck me that I should check what that thing had been doing in the living room. I investigated every electrical appliance. I went to the kitchen to check for a gas leak. Everything seemed as it should be. I went back to my bedroom, but sleep was elusive. Even though my door was locked, I kept thinking I would see that thing crawling on my ceiling. I was insanely grateful to be able to cuddle with my beloved dog for comfort. The next morning, I looked like heck. Not only was I awake all night, I had also spent the last few hours gripped in overwhelming fear. My sister asked if I was feeling okay. I told her I was fine and that I just couldn't sleep. As if on cue, the reason for my haggard appearance was brought into the living room by Matt. Little Akira, blood-curdling, scary baby Akira, was in her little bassinet, looking as harmless as any newborn. After breakfast, we all sat in the living room to watch TV. Even as we chatted and laughed, my eyes were constantly drawn to the baby. I kept looking for any more signs of evil I had caught glimpses of. Nothing. She just gurgled and cooed. Matt got up to get some water from the kitchen, and as he was coming back, he suddenly stopped and yelled at all of us to get up and away from the sofas. He was so hysterical that we did what he asked immediately. Our confusion lasted but a few seconds when the chandelier just above the couch fell and shattered into 1,000 pieces. Glass shards fell everywhere, and while no one was harmed, little Jared was clearly terrified and began to cry. While Jillian attended to him, Matt and I tried to figure out how the heck this had happened. The chandelier had been there ever since I bought the house 3 years ago and never even looked like it was unstable or poorly attached. Matt told me that he saw it was just hanging on for dear life when he told us to get away. Then I remembered what Akira had said the day before. Screw! I remember what I had seen last night and put 2 and 2 together. This chandelier weighed about 50 pounds and was suspended 14 feet above the ground. If it fell on any of us, it could have done some serious, even permanent damage. I shuddered when I considered that it could have fallen on Jared. I was now well and truly terrified of what Akira was capable of doing. Later on, after everyone had calmed down and we had vacuumed the entire living room to get every tiny piece of glass off the floor, I asked Jillian if she had heard any movement the previous night, or if she had saw something unusual. Of course, she said she didn't. She was fast asleep. I didn't know what I was expecting her to say. Matt was holding Akira, trying to get her to burp. His back was turned towards me, but Akira looked right at me. Once again, she gave me that toothless grin, as if daring me to say something, to tell my sister and brother-in-law what I had seen last night. I decided to take Nova outside for her business. Though I was almost convinced that Akira was doing all of this, and that what I had seen last night was real, I wasn't free from the sliver of doubt that I may have hallucinated and was mentally ill. I both hoped and feared that it was the case, because I hated to imagine what it would mean if the other possibility was true. If Akira was some kind of being, what it would mean for my family. As Matt and I made dinner and Jillian did the dishes, the baby was on the kitchen table in her bassinet. We suddenly heard Jared scream from his bedroom. He was jumping on the bed, and just beneath the covers was broken glass. The same broken glass that we had thrown in the trash that very morning. It had pierced his skin, and pieces were lodged into his flesh. "What is happening in this house?" Jillian yelled at no one in particular. She and Matt wondered out loud how the heck had the glass gotten there. They asked Jared if he had done it, and he said no through sob. Matt went into the kitchen to get his cell phone. He came back into the bedroom and asked if anyone had moved the baby. Jillian and I exchanged looks and said no. Matt said the baby wasn't in the bassinet. Jillian rushed into their bedroom, I suppose to check in the crib if the baby had somehow got there by herself. Unbeknownst to them, that was certainly a possibility. I stayed with Jared and tried to comfort him while we tried to get the glass pieces out of his feet. A few minutes later, Jillian and Matt re-entered the room and asked if I had opened the kitchen window. I told them I hadn't. Jillian called 911 as Matt ran outside. She told the dispatcher that someone had broken into the house and stolen her baby. She finished the call and asked me, in a state of hysteria, if I was sure I hadn't opened the window. I once again told her I hadn't. She broke down and started crying. She wondered out loud what was happening to her family. I didn't know if I should comfort my sister or her son, who is still crying. Matt came back in, out of breath, and said he hadn't found anything. Of course he hadn't. That thing moved fast. I had seen it with my own eyes. The cops questioned all three of us. They said something along the lines of how the abductor couldn't have gone far, but I blocked it all out. All I could think was that now that thing was out there, it was in the form of the most harmless thing in the world and can use that to its advantage. It's been weeks since the incident. Matt and Jillian have been alternating between blaming and comforting each other. Jared spends most of his time with me. I've been keeping a keen eye on the local news. There has been a marked increase in people dying in house fires and freak accidents in the city. Anytime I read about them, I can't help but wonder if the last thing those people saw was a tiny baby crawling all over their walls. To all of those who are listening to this, if you see a baby that looks a bit too aware, if it is smiling in a way that babies just shouldn't, run. If you don't have the heart to kill it, just get the heck away from it. You don't know what it's capable of. And to be honest, neither do I. Another young couple came in through the door, and I hurried to get the table ready, sighing. Weekends are always so busy. Car accidents, murders, drug overdoses, it's always the worst shift in the morgue. I do hope you enjoyed these older tales and my old way of reading things has not made you cringe. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you're new, subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications. And we will be back next Sunday, continuing the Basement series. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.